Our book in today's Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Harvey J. Kaye, Professor Harvey Kaye. Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again. This is from the introduction. On December 1st, 1862, in the midst of the Civil War, just weeks before he was to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, President Abraham Lincoln delivered his annual message to Congress. Lincoln firmly believed that the United States had an historic responsibility to demonstrate to the world that people can govern themselves, make equal rights not just a self-evident truth, but a manifest one, and create a political and economic order in which working people, both white and black, are not compelled to bow to anyone, neither aristocrats nor capitalists. Empowered by tens of thousands of black slaves who were already liberating themselves from bondage by escaping to the Union lines, and increasingly confident that the majority of his fellow Americans would recognize the truth of what he was saying, Lincoln closed his address by calling on them to see that the time had come to remember who they were and what they demanded, or what that demanded. He told them that to save the nation and all that it represented, they must live up to the nation's declared revolutionary purpose and promise, and act to radically enhance American freedom by bringing an end to slavery. This is a quote from Lincoln's address. Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. We say we are for the Union. The world will not forget that we say this. We know how to save the Union. The world knows we do know how to save it. We, even we here, hold the power and bear the responsibility. In giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free, honorable alike in what we give and what we preserve. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. We too, end of quote from Lincoln, back to Harvey. We too cannot escape history. Our own struggle to save the nation and the promise it proclaims has begun. Finally, after more than 40 years of fear-driven class war and culture war campaigns against the democratic achievements of generations, the hard-won rights of workers, women and people of color, and the very memory of how they were secured, and now both in the wake of the election debacle of 2016, which gave the presidency to the corrupt, mendacious, racist, sexist, and treacherous demagogue Donald Trump, and continued control of Congress to the formerly conservative but increasingly reactionary Republican Party, and in the face of intensified class and culture war campaigns, we the people have come not only to recognize that American democratic life is in jeopardy, but also to mobilize in hopes of saving it. Millions of us have rallied to the resistance and expressed our democratic fears and desires in action. In the historic Women's March and March for Our Lives of young people, the protests, demonstrations, and legal actions to defend the lives and rights of immigrants and refugees, the Me Too movement to combat sexual assault and harassment, the massive teacher strikes for higher pay and better funding of public schools in states red and blue, and the enthusiastic canvassing and campaigning for a blue wave to win back Congress in the 2018 midterm elections. But resistance is not enough. The time has come for us to remember who we are and what that demands. The time has come for us to embrace our radical history, the history of how a generation of Americans, high and low, and in all their diversity, not only turned their colonial rebellion into a war for independence, but also imbued American life, whether they all intended it or not, with radical imperative and impulse by declaring a revolutionary promise of freedom, equality, and democracy for all. The history of how generations of radicals and reformers served as the prophetic memory of that promise, and how generations of ordinary men and women, native-born and immigrant, struggled to make real the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to expand not only the we in We the People, but also the powers of the people. And most especially in view of the crises we ourselves face, the history of how our greatest generations confronted and prevailed over the forces that threatened to destroy the nation and bury its revolutionary promise in the 1770s, 1860s, and 1930s and 1940s, not to mention the 1960s. by acting to make the United States, both inspired by Washington, Lincoln, and FDR, and pushing them to go farther than they might otherwise have gone, radically freer, more equal, and more democratic than ever before. The time has come to take hold of that history and make America radical again. I've titled this collection of my speeches and essays, Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again, for reasons that will become obvious, and yet I cannot help but confess that if I had had to title it otherwise, I would have been sorely tempted to use, with full attribution, the title Max Lerner gave to his 1938 work, It Is Later Than You Think, The Need for a Militant Democracy. While it may not seem so, the crisis we face is no less demanding of action, urgent action, than that which confronted his generation. The book Take Hold of Our History by Harvey J. Kaye.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Monday. Thom Hartmann here with you. And just, I'm constantly saying just amazing stuff going on. But, we are living in one of those moments of history that people read about. You read about the Black Plague in Europe and, in the 1300s or 14th century. You read about the influenza pandemic in 1918. And here we are. It's just extraordinary, and yet there's, in some ways, this whole coronavirus thing is really highlighting, and I think for many, hopefully many voters, it's showing for the first time in a real way the consequences of Reaganism and neoliberalism and trickle-down economics and brutal. The brutal kind of capitalism that we practice here in the United States as opposed to Europe. For example, let me just give you a couple of data points here. The Fed, since March 11th, now we're not talking about Congress here, I'm talking about the Fed. The Fed, since March 11th, has increased our money supply and distributed that money to basically big corporations by buying their, corporate bonds. The Fed has started buying stocks and bonds to support the stock market. Excuse me. And in particular, they're buying bonds of companies that are in trouble, so that those companies, keep these companies going. They have done this to the tune of $2.26 trillion since March 11th. If you divide $2.26 trillion by 130 million American families, that's how many American families, have a member who is working full or part-time supporting the family. 130 million families. Basically, that's the number of families in the United States. We got 330 million people, and, families are typically 2 or 3 people. The average is 2 point something. So anyhow, you take the 130 million households and you divide it into $2.26 trillion, and what you get is $17,380. In other words, if the Fed had simply said, instead of injecting all this money at the top and giving it to J.P. Morgan Chase and IBM and General Motors, we're going to give this, or companies affiliated with the Trump family, the Trump organization and whatnot. Instead, we're going to give this money to families in the United States and let them spend that money, even if they have to do it online. Let them spend that money in ways that stimulate our economy and help keep things together. Let them use Grubhub and DoorDash and Uber Eats and support their local restaurants. Just what the Fed did, $2.23 trillion since March 11th. That's like, it's a month and a half, would have been over $17,000 for a family in the United States. And then you've got this $2.2 trillion, which is very similar, that Congress authorized, the so-called CARES Act. If all of that had gone to families, again, it would have been $17,000 per family. So we're talking a total of $34,000 per family in the United States in the last month and a half has been passed out to United Airlines and American Airlines and Carnival Cruise Lines that flags their ships in Panama and pays virtually no U.S. taxes, to big donors to the Trump Organization, etc. I mean, virtually every developed country in the world right now is running an economic stimulus program for small businesses, and in almost every single one of them, I told you about Australia last week. The week before last, we went into detail about how they're doing it in Norway and Denmark and Germany and France and Sweden. In virtually every single one of those, the government is giving money to corporations, and the corporations have to use 100% of that money. So in some cases, there's an exception; they can use it for rent or some small portion of it. But basically, 100% of that money has to go to workers, whether they're working or not, and especially if they're not working. That's every Western democracy in the world, from Australia to Germany. The United States, not so much. Here, some of the largest recipients of government aid are politically connected to either the Trump crime family or the Republican Party, or have massive lobbying operations, and most of the money is administered by banks. I think I pointed out last week that the banks have made billions of dollars in fees. They're taking up to 5% fees that the government is paying them to loan money to us that's guaranteed by the government, for which they have no risk. So here we have, all this money is being given to banks. The banks are giving it to who? They're giving it to their best customers, which is the biggest corporations. No other developed country in the world has the equivalent of the U.S. Supreme Court's Citizens United decision that makes corporations into people and lets corporations and rich people basically buy politicians. And therefore, we get headlines like in today's Judd Legum's popular.info newsletter. This was the headline in his newsletter today. Quote, "Multi-millionaire Trump donor is recipient of funds intended for struggling small businesses." Surprised? I mean, that's how bad it is here. Meanwhile, New Zealand announced today that they have eliminated the virus in their country. We are 4.5% of the world's population. We have a quarter of the world's deaths, and we're moving between a quarter and a third of the world's cases. And of course, we're not testing anything close to what we should be or could be. We may have twice that. Our Republican-controlled Supreme Court has succeeded in turning America into the most corrupt Western country in the world. And every time our Republican-controlled Senate meets, they throw another few $100 billion to their rich buddies. I'm telling you, it is time for a political revolution. And then you look at the massive incompetence of this whole thing. Of this whole, this administration, of the Republican Party, just the whole thing. There is a new meeting put together by the World Health Organization. It's an ad hoc grouping of 20 world leaders and global health figures, including, the leaders of most of the world's major democracies and even a few who aren't, right? I mean, China is part of this. 20 world leaders, Angela Merkel, Emmanuel Macron, Bill Gates showed up. And what they're doing is they're sharing information with each other. Here's our studies. Here's what we've learned. Here's what works here. Here's what we tried and it doesn't work. I mean, sharing information like in a really, even very confidential information that could help a country deal with this virus. For example, this isn't, an example that's coming out of this study, but for example, one of the things that they found in China was that people who were taking heartburn medication, specifically what we call Pepcid, were less likely to get a severe case of the coronavirus. It was anecdotal, it was a small study, but hey, so now we've got a test, a controlled trial of a few hundred people where they're giving them IV Pepcid, large doses. So what happens? You go on Amazon right now, or any of the websites, Walgreens, CVS, whatever, you can't buy Pepcid. We give little bits of Pepsid to our dog. We've got a dog who's an Aussie, and they're high anxiety dogs. You know, I've got to herd the sheep. Where's the sheep? Oh my God, where are the sheep? I got to herd the sheep. And he gets GERD, so we can't get Pepsid now for our dog. Well, you know, that's the kind of information that they're going to be sharing with each other at this meeting. And the United States knows about this because it was published in a medical journal, but you know who didn't show up for the meeting, who's not participating? The United States. Why? Because Donald Trump has decided he's going to blame his own stupid incompetence on the World Health Organization.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So how badly has Citizens United screwed America, and how many Americans are going to die because of it? Thank you, Supreme Court. And welcome back. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I mean, this is what happens when you have a faction controlling all of the communications, the political thinking. It is so out of sync with what the rest of the world is doing, what Americans would like, and a sensible critique is, I mean, you know, to critique how you're doing compared to Denmark, how you're doing compared to Norway, or how you're doing compared to the UK or Australia or Canada. But that is, like, it's talked about, but it isn't the mainstream. You know, it's just taken out of, we're not permitted to talk about it. I mean, for decades, I've been frustrated about healthcare, frustrated about the economy, and this is just sensible, rational political economy. And, you know, I mean, continue on. It's great that you're bringing this up to quite a few people, but, you know, I hope that somehow we can change this. And, yeah, Citizens United has to go. And they've turned us into Brazil or Argentina. We've become the biggest banana republic, and they don't care. And they actually, I think, when it comes down to it, don't care whether you, I, or family, or whoever just dies. You know, that's where they're at. This is the kind of people that now run this country. And, anyway. Oh, hello?
Yeah. No, I get it, John.
I thought
I wrote Unequal Protection, a book about how the Supreme Court screwed America all the way back to 1886. I wrote that book in 2000.
Yes. Yeah, 20 years
ago. I mean, this is... Yeah, exactly. 20 years ago. Go ahead.
Yeah, and, you know, there used to be a little bit more oomph with critiquing that kind of thing. Back in 2000, like public radio used to actually do very hard-hitting critiques of the way we're doing things as compared to how we're doing things in Germany.
Yeah, that was before they started taking
you know, it's... I mean, and it's not just in this country, but to the extent that this is like the epitome of neoliberal ridiculousness or dystopian. I mean, it goes beyond the pale. And now, you know, last week you had somebody on talking about traditionalism. So now we have to deal with this new ideology, and it's being funded by people like Sebastian Gorka and some of these wealthy aristocrats. You know, I guess they're tired of just being on the cover of Town and Country and Royalty magazine, and they want to, you know, actually... bring back the divine right of kings. I mean, can you believe that? And there are people...
As long as they're the kings.
Yes, and there are people in this country, and I come from an Orthodox background, but I would not want to see a czar raised again. It wasn't good for the church. It wasn't good in the end. It really destroyed things. And how arrogant to think, oh, well, let's just turn back, centuries past to the 5th century or the 6th century or 1200. I mean, it's so beyond the pale.
Yeah, I'm with you. John, well said. Thank you. It is truly and sadly mind-boggling. We'll be right back. Hang on just a second here. Got to let John go. We'll be right back in just a minute, and we'll continue the rant. Stick around. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Let me toss another question into the mix along with a little more news here. Do you think Donald Trump has a chance to win in November? It seems to me that with his, you can just, get some chewable bleach tablets. I don't know if you've seen that meme that's going around. It was at the top of Drudge for a while. And chewable Clorox, recommended by the president. There's a growing consensus in Republican circles. This isn't just the media. This is among Republicans that Donald Trump has finally said something, done something that so completely displays what an idiot he is. And I mean that in the vulgar sense of the word, not the medical sense of the word. What a fool he is, what an ass he is, how uninformed he is, how unthoughtful he is, how inconsiderate he is, how he doesn't think before he speaks, how he doesn't understand things. This is why he's had 6 major bankruptcies. This is why he's not a rich guy. He's instead massively in debt. Because he's an idiot. He's stupid. I mean, literally stupid. But anyhow, the growing thought in Republican circles is that his followers are starting to figure this out. I mean, look at the people who are showing up for the Freedom Works things. You know, the Freedom Works, the group that the Koch brothers helped fund and kick off. Freedom Works has been promoting these reopen the country protests all around the United States. And when you look at the pictures of the people who are showing up for these protests, it's not soccer moms and average people. It's out-of-shape white guys carrying AR-15s and Confederate flags and swastikas. I mean, that's about all he's got left, is people who are a little less smart than Donald Trump. Which, when you think about it, is pretty amazing. I mean, really amazing. So, apropos of that, I mean, Donald Trump is rapidly becoming Herbert Hoover, the president who in the 1920s ignored the Great Depression until the very last year when he created the Reconstruction, the National Reconstruction Administration was, as I recall, what Herbert Hoover created in 1932. And it continued. I mean, it carried on for a while. But, and by the way, let me, just a digression here. Yesterday, Louise and I discovered on HBO, we get HBO through our Amazon Prime subscription. I mean, you had to pay for it, but we got it. This incredible new series. We were up until 10 o'clock last night, which is really late for us, because we couldn't stop watching it. There's only 6 episodes up. We watched all 6 of them yesterday afternoon. It's called The Plot Against America. And it's a story of what might have happened if in 1940, instead of Franklin Roosevelt being elected president, Charles Lindbergh was. Charles Lindbergh, who is the champion of America First, which was the We Like Hitler movement here in the United States. It's amazing. If you have HBO, check it out. But anyhow, back to Trump. His campaign thinks he's already lost Michigan. They're worried about his ability to suppress the vote in both Wisconsin and Florida. Do you think he has a chance to win in November? And for that matter, do you think that the Republican Party is going to win? Well, apparently the folks over at Freedom Works, I started out with my rant about Freedom Works here. The Koch-funded, now it's got funding from other sources, but it was really kicked off by the Koch brothers. The Freedom Works is who was driving the Tea Party movement, and in some cases renting these $300,000 buses to move Tea Partiers around so that they could have their very carefully staged anti-Obama and anti-Obamacare rallies
so that the media would pay all kinds of attention to it and give them hundreds of millions, billions of dollars worth of free publicity, which is exactly what happened. Well, I got my email today from Adam Brandon, the president of FreedomWorks. Barney, Nancy Pelosi and the radical left are hell-bent on stealing the 2020 election. In fact, they're trying to sneak their universal mail-in voting scheme into the next $1 trillion spending bill. Now, if you have a pencil or paper nearby, write down this phone number. This is the number FreedomWorks is passing out, 515-302-6463. So they say, call 515-302-6463 and tell your members of Congress to oppose Pelosi's plan to expand mail-in voting and steal the 2020 elections. Barney, it isn't just the Democrats in Congress supporting this nonsense. Liberal extremists like Michelle Obama, Rita Wilson, and Tom Hanks support it too. Oh my God, Tom Hanks! The entire DNC establishment knows they can't get this passed. If they can't get this passed, it'll lead to massive voter fraud. Excuse me, let me start over again. The entire DNC establishment knows if they can get this passed, it'll lead to massive voter fraud and help them win in November. That's why we've got to do everything we can to stop them. And Barney, I'm counting on you to help FreedomWorks do it. Please call 515-302-6463 and tell your members of Congress to stop Nancy Pelosi from stealing the 2020 election by opposing their universal mail-in voting racket. So if you call that number, and I did this morning, in fact, I think what I'll do is I'll share the number with you when we come back from the break. We're gonna hit that break in a little less than a minute, but and then I'll pick up your phone calls. But if you call that number, you get this rant from FreedomWorks, and then they ask for your zip code. You plug in your zip code, and they actually connect you to your member of Congress. It's very easy. It's very painless. And I think that you and now FreedomWorks sent this out to millions and millions of Americans, and they're calling their members of Congress right now and saying, don't let Nancy Pelosi steal the election with mail-in voting. So you might want to, again, write down the number. I'll give it again on the other side of this break, 515-302-6463. This is the FreedomWorks number that will get you to your member of Congress. You just have to listen to a little FreedomWorks rant that, if nothing else, will get your blood flowing if you haven't had enough exercise today. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I'll share their call with you, and we will pick up your calls right after this break.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Animal Kind, Remarkable Discoveries About Animals and Revolutionary Ways to Show Them Compassion by Ingrid Newkirk and Jean Stone. This is from the very first chapter. Researchers at Germany's Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology were dumbfounded. The excitement wasn't over a new fossil or the discovery of a previously unknown human ancestor. It was over Rico, a border collie. In experiments conducted in 2004, the very normal-seeming 10-year-old canine had learned to fetch more than 200 objects on command, and moreover, remembered them all a month later. Determined to discover the limits of Rico's abilities, the research team subjected him to a battery of cognitive tests that revealed astounding problem-solving abilities. Rico could easily retrieve from another room items he was familiar with, but when told to retrieve a new item, one he had never heard before, Rico correctly deduced that the unknown name must correspond with an unknown object, and correctly retrieved it. The Border Collie's cognitive abilities were subsequently compared to that of apes, dolphins, parrots, and eventually human children. Researchers often end up comparing their animal subjects' intelligence to humans, but is intelligence truly easy to compare, animal to human, or even animal to animal? If Rico could use the process of elimination to correctly fetch a tennis ball, does that make him smarter than an Arctic tern who journeys 44,000 miles each year between the North and South Poles? Is a piano-playing cat more intelligent than a chimpanzee who shares 99% of her DNA with humans and can learn sign language? Comparing the intelligence of animals is, in fact, no easier than comparing the intelligence of humans. Who's smarter, Aristotle or Plato, Newton or Einstein, Monet or Manet, the red-lipped batfish or Chinese giant salamanders, the Indian elephant or the African elephant. In the end, ranking the relative intelligence of animals is a futile exercise. What's more, a recent study found that less than 15% of the estimated 9 million species on Earth have been discovered. Who knows what fantastical creatures reside at our ocean's crushing depths, soar high in the stratosphere, or creep deep in the densest jungles? What fantastic intelligence do they display? Or, more so, what fantastic intelligence we can't even comprehend? We often consider intelligence as the only factor in determining which animals deserve compassion and which don't. Yet we're still so limited in our understanding of human intelligence that it makes little sense to calibrate our animal brethren based on how similar their brains are to ours. Or perhaps you could say it's simply not an intelligent way to determine importance. The goal of this book is not to merely question that superiority or to show that animals think and act like us. It's to show how they do not and to honor those differences. How can anyone compare the mental faculties of a gibbon vaulting through the forest with a giant blue whale singing through the deepest oceans? Different animals excel at different actions. As we'll see in this book, animals think, navigate, communicate, love, and play in extraordinarily unique ways. However, for many years, scientists believed that intelligence was indeed all that mattered when it came to animals, and that intelligence consisted of a continuum with humans at the most developed end. Every other species could fit neatly into that spectrum, a concept heralded by the great naturalist Charles Darwin, who wrote in his 1871 book, The Descent of Man, that, quote, "The difference in mind between man and the higher animals, great as it is, certainly is one of degree and not of kind," end quote. In essence, Darwin meant that because all animals share a common ancestor, they also share the same toolkit of mental abilities, but at different levels. Not a new idea. 2,400 years ago, Aristotle presented his idea of natural ladder, or scala natura. Like Darwin, Aristotle advanced that all life could be conveniently ranked with lesser animals like worms on one end, intermediate animals like dogs and cats in the middle, and higher animals such as monkeys and humans at the far end. During the Middle Ages, Christian theologians expanded on Aristotle's teachings with the great chain of being, a hierarchical scale that began with God at the very top, followed by angels, humans, other animals, plants, and then minerals. Each layer of the chain also had its own hierarchy. Among humans, for instance, kings, aristocrats, and other noblemen were at the top, while peasants were relegated to the bottom. The highest-ranking animals were large carnivores like lions and tigers, who were untrainable and therefore seen as superior to docile animals like dogs and horses. Even insects were subdivided, with honey-producing bees ranked higher than mosquitoes and plant-eating beetles. Finally, at the very bottom sat snakes, their lowly station, a result of the serpent's deception in the Garden of Eden. Even throughout the 20th century, scientists clung to the notion that animals can be neatly ranked by their human intelligence. Scientists devised increasingly cruel experiments that could serve as universal tests for animal cognition, many of them led by University of Wisconsin-Madison psychologist Harry Harlow. Previously, Harlow was best known for a series of experiments from the 1950s, in which he removed infant rhesus monkeys from their mothers and provided them surrogate mothers made from wire. The traumatized monkeys' desperate attempts to be caressed by their inanimate mothers during times of stress became the basis for research into maternal separation, dependency needs, and social isolations. Many historians cite Harlow as a factor in the rise of subsequent animal liberation movements. Later, Harlow developed experiments called learning sets, which effectively tested how well a subject could learn. For instance, an animal would be presented with two doors, one containing food. The test would be repeated until the animal learned the correct door. Much like Aristotle's Scala Naturae, it continues. Animal Kind is the book by Newkirk and Stone.
Dealing with COVID-19, we're also hurtling toward extinction. Dr. Justin Frank drops by saying Trump could see dead bodies from coronavirus and just step over them. What? Also, Greg Palast explains the secret history of the Deepwater Horizon, BP's second blowout. It's the 10-year anniversary for Deepwater Horizon's debacle. Find The Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Well, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So here is how it works. If you call this FreedomWorks number and try to. Hang on just a second.
Millions have lost jobs, and millions more are under lockdown. The last thing we need right now is uncertainty in our elections.
Right.
That's exactly what Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats are trying to create.
Oh, no.
She's trying to expand mail-in voting nationwide,
Woo!
opening up the 2020 election to fraud, manipulation, and even voter harassment.
Oh, that's terrible.
Don't let Nancy Pelosi steal the election. Call your members of Congress right now.
Yes,
Tell them
yes,
to stop this
immediately.
mail-in voting scam and protect your vote.
Mail-in voting is a
Please enter
scam.
your 5-digit zip code to be connected.
Please enter your 5-digit zip code to be connected. Okay.
You entered 97217. If this is correct,
Yes, it
press
is.
1. We'll now connect you to Ronald Wyden.
Da-da-da.
After your call
My
is
senator.
done, press star and we'll connect you to your next official.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so that's how you do it. 515-302-6463. And, but anyhow, to your thoughts, Brian in Tacoma. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Hey, how's it going today? Well,
Good.
actually, I know the answer to that question, but so you were asking if you think Trump can win, and I think popular vote, not a chance. He's never had a chance to win the popular vote, and it's only getting worse. But electoral college, yeah, I think he's still the favorite, unfortunately, because he only needs to monkey around with like 2 states, and then he's got it. So
Yeah,
I'm very
more like 3 or
concerned.
4, but yeah.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
I mean,
Go ahead, Brian.
concerned.
I'm sorry.
Very concerned. No,
Yeah,
no,
I
that's all.
agree with you.
I'm concerned.
Yeah, well said. I'm very concerned too, and their voter suppression is a big piece of this, and their opposition to mail-in voting. This is why the billionaires are funding this 515-302-6463 number. Is they don't want mail-in voting because they know that if it's easy to vote, Democrats win, Republicans lose. It's that simple. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Hi, Tom. You asked the question, do I think that Trump could be reelected again, given this boondoggle, disastrous thing he did last week? And my answer is, hell yes, I think so. And the reason is, to start with, I recommend a book. It's called, a good friend of mine wrote a book called The Hidden History of the War on Voting. If you have a few minutes, you ought to read that sometime. And that's kind of why. I mean, you ought to know better. Donald Trump wasn't elected to begin with. He was installed through a stolen election. And
Right, same as George W. Bush.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And, I remember we had a discussion, you and I did, before the last election, and you said, I'm scared to death that Donald Trump is going to be president. And I said, Tom, I really do have more faith in this country than that. And I laughed it off. And then when the returns came in, I realized, I've been had. I actually thought that votes were how the elections were decided in this country. I realized right then, this was stolen. It was stolen, obviously, in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. There were more precincts in those, statistically, completely impossible number of precincts that were decided in Donald Trump's favor that were less than 1%. Michigan, he won by 10,700 votes, supposedly he won, which should have triggered a recount. But because in Michigan there was a Republican administration, governor, attorney general, secretary of state, all those 3 of those have flipped now. There may be a protection in that regard, but I still think there's going to be. You can see it now. The war on the post office. This is what he's up to. They will stop it. Tom, the guns that you see in those marches. Fascism has taken a foothold. It's here,
Yep.
and
Yep.
we're not going to get rid of it. We're not going to get rid of it. We are going to be battling it for decades. It's here. It's taken a foothold. It's supported by Russia. It's already here. One thing I wanted to point out about the post office, since everyone's heard this story, is recognizing what's going on now. But the story, we have to straighten this fact out. the story about it was called the Postal Enhancement and Accountability Act of 2006. This is what the Republicans in the lame duck session before they lost the Congress in the 2006 election passed a bill that was going to force the post office to fund their retirements, something like 75 or 80 years in advance. Right. You've talked about it on this show, and it would have required for the next 10 years that the post office kick in an extra $8 billion. They had to have $80 billion, and this was going to sunset expire in 2016. What happened with that?
I thought it was 5. Huh? You sure it's 8?
It was $8 billion a year.
Okay, I'll try to revise my memory. Okay, cool. Thank you, Paul.
Well, it was supposed to accrue $80 billion. So over 10 years through 2016. And what happened to that was they paid the first installment of the $8 billion, but it really took a hit. And the reason that they did this is because the post office operates on its own, and it's profitable. And they were about ready to convert half of their Jeep fleet, the little Jeeps that drive around, to electric. And the post office, being the largest single customer of fossil fuels, the fossil fuel industry went nuts. And so they had to find a way to hamstring the post office, and so they thought, we'll take that, because they had the money. They were going to do the conversion. They said, no, that money is going to go into a long-term, we'll make you fund your retirements. Well, after the first installment of the first $8 billion, they knew they would sink if they had to do this. This was impossible. So the lawyers for the post office read the bill and said, well, what happens? What's the penalty if we don't pay it? I mean, it can't be more than $8 billion. And what they found is that there was no penalty. It was a ruse. There was no penalty for not paying it. So the post office paid the one installment, and then they never paid any more. And now the bill has expired.
Oh, really? I thought they were still. That's interesting.
No,
Paul, go ahead.
No, they paid the one installment, and then the lawyers for the post office looked at what would be the penalty, and because they were thinking, we'd gladly pay the penalty if it was only, if it was less. So they realized, no, in the bill it says there is no penalty. There is no penalty for non-payment. So they only paid the 1 year, and then they didn't pay anymore. And I went through this. My source on that, this was a discussion on the Norman Goldman show a long time ago. So I don't know where the sources are for that, but that's where I got that information.
Yeah, I was going to ask you for that because my memory is that it was $5 billion and that they paid it for a decade. But I've seen so many different stories characterizing it in so many different ways. I'll have to do a deep dive. And if anybody has the details, the very specific details on that, please tweet them to me. Paul, thanks a lot for the call. It's good to hear from you. Zoe in Encino, California. Is it Zoe or Zoe?
It's really Zoanne.
Zoanne! Hey, Zoanne, what's up?
That's my real name. I'm just calling because I want to thank you for the information about the Tilden Hayes election.
It's 1876, yes.
1876, yep. It's just amazing. I looked at it, too, because I like to check facts. I'm a fact girl. Mm-hmm. And anyhow, I want to thank you for that information because it clarified some things, some of the things I've been feeling worrisome about. And I am in touch with my council people here, our senators here in California. We have Brad Sherman. We have, of course, Adam Schiff. We have some great people, very intelligent people that know what's going on. And the bottom line is, I tried yesterday to call Adult Protective Services because I feel once again that Donald Trump is in danger to himself and to others. And I did read the book by Dr. Lee regarding the cases, the dangerous case of Donald Trump, written by, 27 psychiatrists, psychologists. And I just think, how far does it go before this man is taken out of office? How far can this go? He is a sick man. He is dangerous man. And now we have this pandemic. And he is just way out of touch with reality. So we must find a way to get rid of him. And I'm all for the mailbox ballots. I joined Stacey Abrams' thing on the internet.
Cool.
Cool with you too. Thank you so much for what you do.
Okay, Zoanne, thanks a lot for the call. Great to hear from you. And we'll be back with more of your thoughts and more of the news of the day. Boy, do we have a pile of it. New Zealand has eliminated the coronavirus. Seriously. They got on top of it. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
While Trump was dithering and BSing and lying his ass off, New Zealand actually did something about the coronavirus, and it is nearly gone. And welcome back. Mike in Lomita, California, listening on KPFK. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, Tom, you remember the Fire Sign Theater, that satirical comedy group from the 70s and 60s? Well,
I talk to Phil Proctor in email regularly.
Yeah, my head is stuck in that one routine where they have the electoral candidate whose slogan is, "I am not insane," and then they repeat,
"He's
not insane."
Pat Boone for president, not insane. Yeah.
That's the other one. Yeah, so of late that has seemed to be particularly appropriate, and no matter how many people raise questions about Biden's cognitive decline, all they have to do is play a tape of Trump and say, Biden's not insane.
Yeah, I saw a spoof Biden ad over the weekend, and it had the Biden logo, and underneath it said, he won't inject you with bleach.
That's true. And meanwhile, just an indication of how low this country has come in the past 20 years of Reaganomics. Remember, after Hurricane Katrina, Americans who were desperate to stay alive were at the tender mercies of heck of a job Brownie, the Arabian horse breeder flack. And today, Americans faced with disaster are at the tender mercies, or of the leadership, of a Labradoodle breeder. So, that's a real decline. The family can live off of a horse for a month, but how long is it going to, last with its only a Labradoodle for your food supply? And I think the result of all this is that many Americans are starting to realize that there are people who don't care whether they live and die, and those are the people who are in charge, supposedly, of protecting their lives. So now a lot of Americans are starting to understand what it's like to be a black American.
Yeah, a lot of white Americans are starting to get that. Yeah, and that's been increasingly happening over the last decade, I think, but particularly in the last 4 or 5 years. Yeah, excellent point, Mike. Well made. Thank you very much for the call. David in Spotswood, New Jersey. Hey, David, what's up?
Hey, maybe I'm in a bubble, but I speak to Trumpsters all day long, and people around, and very few of them have said they changed their minds. I hear all kinds of bat crazy stories. Yesterday, I heard a story that Bill Gates in China created the COVID virus to reduce the world population. I hear all kinds of bat crazy stories, and I just want to, I read a book called The Deep State. It was written by a Republican operative, someone that was in the Republican Party for 30 years, and right before Donald Trump in 2014. And he said that Republicans think they have a cognitive dissonance. They believe that they once had power, whether it's true or not, and that they desperately have to get it back. So I think there's enough of them out there that are going to reelect them, and we're going to have a fascist state.
Well, I think we're already 3/4 of the way there. One of the things that really amazed me about this show on HBO, that the reason I watched last night, The Plot Against America, was the basic banality of evil. And this is, people think that, fascism comes with some guy going, I am the great leader and you are doomed. It's not how it works. It looks like American government. And this movie does a brilliant job of showing that, or this TV series, The Plot Against America on HBO. We'll be right back. Did you know that Ronald Reagan committed treason to become president in 1980, and George Herbert Walker Bush was in on it, and he avoided being prosecuted for this in 1992 with a little help from Bill Barr? It's on page 116 of my book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. We have a new video over at thomhartmann.com for the people who support our program, and it's an interesting one. The phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, has a really interesting history, and the exploitation of that phrase and that history by right-wingers in 20th century America, or late 20th century America, now 21st century America, also has a fascinating and rather grim history. Just the general absurdity of the idea that somebody can lift themselves off the ground by reaching down and pulling on a strap on their boots. Just think about it for a second. But it's used. This is used as justification by right-wingers, particularly over the last 40 years since the Reagan Revolution, to say, poor people, their poverty is their own fault. Check it out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Thom Hartmann here with you. We are talking about, what present state of our politics, I suppose, for lack of a better way to define it. Chuck in Cody was Wyoming. Excuse me. Hey, Chuck, what's on your mind? How's Wyoming?
It's not bad. It's kind of free of people.
There you go. What's up?
Well, Tom, first I want to thank you for all that you think and say and do in your life. And how much you appreciate in this barren land of Democrats here.
Thank you.
And the thing I'm calling about, Tom, is your reference to that phone number for Freedom Works, and it got me kind of worried about how many people will be influenced enough on the Democrat side to call in and state that we agree that the post office should be in charge of mail-in ballots.
Nobody who's going to call that number as a consequence of hearing me talk about it is going to, there may be a few right-wingers, I suppose, who are listening to the show, but by and large,
they're going to get the letter, aren't they? Or is that not true?
No. If you call the number, it just redirects to they're using one of these. It's a 515 number. They're using one of these call. Like the free conference call kind of thing. They're using one of these computerized telephone systems.
But you got a letter, didn't you?
I got an email.
You got an email
because I'm on their list. Actually, Barney Rubble got an email. But yeah.
But won't all of their people get that email and make that call?
No, if you call the number, you're not going to get the email.
No, I don't mean that. I mean, the Freedom Works sent that email out.
Oh, yeah, this went out to their entire email list. I don't know how many people are on it, but, it could be thousands, it could be millions.
That's the number I'm concerned about, is how many of them got that email.
Well, that's why I was publicizing this, because, you've got people all over the country who, and I probably should have stayed on the line, and when Ron Wyden's office answered, asked them, although you have to clear this with people before you put them on the air when you're talking to an actual person. Ask them which office they're in, because my guess is that rather than just redirecting people to the main numbers in Washington, D.C., they may well be redirecting people to local office number. But I don't know. That would be a smart way to do it, where you're more likely to get a human being rather than a recording.
I was just concerned that I know there's more people than there are in Wyoming that are watching you, a lot more, but that the ultimate tally of the phone calls would be 800 something for them to stop this thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about it, Chuck. I wouldn't worry about it. It's not.
13 of us
it's not.
Let's do it.
Yeah, they're not gonna. It's the point is, this is what they're up to. I mean, if you want to just call their office, the regular office for members of Congress, it's 202-224-3121. And you can ask for your 2 senators, and you can ask for your member of the House of Representatives. But, I get your concerns, but I think they're overblown, respectfully. Chuck, thanks for the call. It's great to hear from you. David in Los Angeles. Hey, David, what's up?
Well, good morning, Tom. And to answer the question as to whether or not Trump can get reelected,
yes,
right? I would submit to you, Tom, if we put policies and legislation above personalities, right, that definitely the type of legislation that Trump has been signing off on and the kinds of legislation that has been passed since this corona thing hit is things that Trump can sign off on all day long. And as you had started your program off with doing the math on what would have happened if they would have just dispersed the funds to the people, right? Mm-hmm. They didn't do that, right? But what they did do, it was legislation to which corporate America is quite pleased with. Wouldn't that be so?
As are very, very wealthy people. There's another multi-billion-dollar tax break tucked into this most recent $300 or $400 billion bailout that everybody had to go back to Congress to sign. I mean, this is the price that Mitch McConnell charges. If you want to help out average working Americans, you got to help out the billionaires. Period. Full stop. This is the problem with having Republicans control any one of the 3 branches of government.
But I would submit to you too, Tom, because when I say legislation and policy above personality, that would also be above politics or political party, right? Mm-hmm. Now, if we would look at this, we have, as you very well know, a corporate wing of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, David, your voice just went super muffled. I don't know if your thumb slipped over your microphone. Try and say that again so I can get it.
Well, you have a corporate part of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, David, I'm sorry, I can't understand what you're saying. It's interesting. It's strange. David, my apologies, but thank you for the call, and thanks for watching us on YouTube. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Unfortunately,
We have a new video over at thomhartmann.com for the people who support our program, and it's an interesting one. The phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, has a really interesting history, and the exploitation of that phrase and that history by right-wingers in 20th century America, or late 20th century America, now 21st century America, also has a fascinating and rather grim history. Just the general absurdity of the idea that somebody can lift themselves off the ground by reaching down and pulling on a strap on their boots. I mean, just think about it for a second. but it's used. This is used as justification by right wingers, particularly over the last 40 years since the Reagan Revolution, to say, oh, poor people. Their poverty is their own fault. Check it out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Shatter the Nations, ISIS and the War for the Caliphate by Mike Giglio. This is from the prologue. Dateline, Mosul, Iraq, February 2017. Abdul Wahab swore it was a true story. His eyes were reflected in the rearview mirror as he sped his pickup through battle-beaten country. To the left, the setting sun cast a Polaroid haze across brown fields and squat stone farmhouses. To the right was a ridge of mountains. Ahead was a flat road and a darkening sky. There was a big soldier named Will. That's how Abdul Wahab put it. He pronounced the name Wool. Wool, Wool. He said it a couple more times, like he hadn't said it in a while. He slowed the truck to roll through the final checkpoint manned by the Kurdish militia, whose green and red flags snapped in a bitter wind. A soldier in a scarf manned a machine gun on the barricade that marked the boundary. From there, the road led 60 miles through territory controlled by the Iraqi military to the edge of Mosul and the last bastions of the ISIS caliphate. Will was one of the American Special Forces sent to Iraq more than a decade earlier to kill insurgents. The nights of the Iraq War had been filled with U.S. commando raids, and the Americans had created Abdul Wahab's elite battalion to do the raids with them, an Iraqi version of the Delta Force, or SEAL Team 6. The battalion had an English name, the Iraqi Counterterrorism Force, and was known by its initials, ICTF, which the men sewed onto their uniforms and painted on their Humvees. The Iraqis admired their American mentors. They picked up the Special Forces ethos, wore baseball caps and sunglasses, used words like the F word and bro and dude. But Will was different, Abdul Wahab said. He would lose control. Abdul Wahab kept his foot on the gas pedal as he raced through a Christian town that seemed to be empty. ISIS had destroyed some of the houses, and the ones still standing were dark. Not a soul was visible except a trio of Iraqi soldiers who sat on a leather couch on the roadside. The photographer, Warzar Jaf, was in the passenger seat. I was in the back. Abdul Wahab's M16 was by my feet. An ICTF veteran in his 40s who had given up fighting, Abdul Wahab had been ferrying Jaf and me to and from Mosul for months. He was stocky and gruff and expert at passing through the myriad checkpoints that led to the front lines, always knowing what to say or whom to call or when to gift his sunglasses to an admiring militiaman. He was an ideal wheelman for navigating the strange tapestry of the alliance, with all its varied forces flying their banners around the city like armies in a medieval siege. His commanders used him for special transport of weapons and supplies, and officers who wanted to escape for a night to the hotels of Erbil, the Kurdish capital and nearest outpost of modernity, a place where they could find a decent dinner and booze, or visit a mall or swim in a pool, and grasp at a moment of normalcy on the edge of the world's most brutal war zone. As grumpy as Sharon, he was forever making the 45-mile journey between the two valley cities, and when Jaf and I had no other way to get to the war, we went with him. A folk song about an old battle was playing on the radio. You made your tribe proud of you, I can hear them scream. Abdul Wahab was still talking about Will. First he began shooting animals on patrol. Then on a raid one night he shot an old man as he opened his front door. Abdul Wahab had seen it happen, said he'd seen it happen. The man's daughter was screaming, beating her chest in grief, and Will said something like, I just gave him an injection, he's sleeping, and threw a mattress onto the old man. He killed a teenager in front of his mother, jamming his gun into the boy's mouth. Abdul Wahab said he saw the boy's mangled head. He killed one man as Iraqi medics were treating him. He killed another while he lay in bed beside his wife. I asked what had happened to Will. Abdul Wahab said he didn't know. Will was transferred one day, and that was the last he'd seen of him, but he reckoned that a man like him must have met his judgment eventually. What he was telling me I knew was a ghost story. It reminded me of old reports of torture and orange jumpsuits and dead civilians, and that what America asked of its soldiers could unhinge them. The war that defined my parents' generation in Vietnam had the draft and civil unrest with it. By the time the Iraq War started, when I was 18, America had a volunteer army, so people like me could carry on without worrying that our number would be called. The country still found itself with a guilty conscience, though, and in this war with ISIS, the only U.S. soldiers on the front lines were the secret kind, small groups of commandos whose every mission was classified, while U.S. pilots and drone operators dropped bombs. It was left to local soldiers, like the men of Abdul Wahhab's battalion, to do the bulk of the fighting. And as far as most Americans and their politicians were concerned, the war was out of sight and out of mind. In a way, it made sense. Fewer Americans lost their lives or their minds or committed war crimes. There were fewer stories like Will's. Yet, in this new kind of U.S. war that culminated in Mosul, the deadliest urban battle in which America had engaged in at least half a century, the toll was still being paid by the local soldiers who were U.S. allies and by the civilians who were dying by the thousands in the crossfire. And I worried about the psyche of a country that still considered itself at war, but was more disengaged than ever from it, with no sense of shared sacrifice or even collective responsibility. On the one hand, America seemed obsessed with ISIS, roiling with every terror attack, while on the other, they made little effort to understand the enemy or the local soldiers doing most of the killing and dying to stop it. The book Shatter the Nations. In food, the test would be repeated until the animal learned the correct door. Much like Aristotle's Scala Naturae, it continues. Animal Kind is the book.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Congressman Ro Khanna, who represents the state of California, or at least the 17th District, the Silicon Valley area in the U.S. House of Representatives. He is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna, and ROKHANNA. Khanna.house.gov is his website. And he's going to be with us for the whole hour taking your calls. We're doing a national town hall meeting here on this Monday. And Congressman Khanna, welcome back to the program. I'm wondering what is on your mind right now? What's at the top of your list of things that you think that people need to know about?
Well, we are pushing for the next phase of the stimulus, and the critical part of that has to be, in my view, a check to every American. Tim Ryan and I, Bernie Sanders, have been pushing for $2,000 a month. This is something we need to be for people to make rent, for people to afford to put food on the table. We're pushing for workers' Bill of Rights. All of these essential workers, they need safety. They need to be paid for what they're doing to keep our society open. And we're pushing for relief to the states and localities. We're going to see dramatic cuts otherwise. I
was talking with a friend of mine in Australia Friday, I guess it was Friday afternoon, and or Saturday, whenever it was, anyhow, last week. And he said that they've got a program there where any employer can claim up to $3,000 per month for every employee, but 100% of that money has to pass through the employer to the employee. It includes part-time and even occasional time workers. You can't exceed what their salary would have been or their income would have been, but up to that amount. It can be supplemental or not, but 100% of it has to go through. Over at wolfstreet.com, they point out the Fed has printed $2.26 trillion, and of course, you guys have appropriated more than that. But just looking at that, this is since March 11th to basically support the stock market and the Wall Street banks. And they note that if the Fed had spread that $2.26 trillion equally over the 130 million households in the United States, each household would have received $17,380. Which makes it around $34,000 per household if you add the $2 trillion that came out of Congress. Why are we appropriating? Why is so much of this money ending up in the hands of people who are in tight with the Trump administration and whatnot? I mean, Judd Legum's newsletter, popular.info this morning, the headline: multimillionaire Trump donor is top recipient of funds intended for struggling small businesses.
Well, look, I wish, Tom, I could have my staff, I think, just copy and paste exactly your transcript there, because we've been pushing for $2,000 a month for families, and that would be
for a year probably about the cost of all of the other bailout that we've done. And the reality is when you see the stock market, frankly, doing as well as it is, only 16% off its high, and yet people struggling to get rent paid, struggling to put food on the table, you know that the priorities of allocation have been wrong. We should have just given people the money they needed. And so I think that this has shown yet again that we haven't had the correct principles like we did in 2008. We had a bailout that was too geared towards Wall Street. I think it led to some of the populist backlash, and I fear that you're going to see the same thing, and we still aren't helping the people who need it most.
Yeah, it's really, really unfortunate. Well, let's pick up phone calls, okay?
Yes.
Okay, Catherine in Kearney, Nebraska. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, I'm not sure this is an appropriate question, but we'll see. I'm concerned about, at the beginning of the program, they were talking about voter suppression, and I'm calling about my concern about the Electoral College and the way it's run in most of the states. I'm from Nebraska, and Nebraska does not run their Electoral College like 48 of the other states. Nebraska and Maine, they split their votes in the Electoral College according to how the actual people in the state vote. Like when Obama and McCain... Right? That's correct. No, well, the whole election, like when McCain and Obama, we have 5 electoral votes, and when McCain and Obama ran, 20% of the population of Nebraska voted for Obama, and so he got one of our votes, and McCain got the other 4. And I know that Maine is the only other state that splits their vote according to the actual votes, and my concern is that, you know, the winner take all that seems to be in all of the other states. Why is that? Why do they do it that way? Because, like, you could have, if this is a close election, you could have 51% voting for Trump and you get 49 voting for Biden, and then the winner take all the votes go for Trump. And when you're dealing with large states like California and Texas, that's a lot of votes that are just thrown away, and I think that's why people think, well, my vote doesn't count.
I think you raised some very good points, and I think this is the challenge with the Electoral College system, where you really could have a situation of Trump losing by 5, 6, 7 million popular votes and still potentially eking out a win in the Electoral College. I mean, even Republicans, even Trump's supporters concede that he has virtually no chance of winning the popular vote. I mean, I think even Brad Pascal, his campaign manager, will tell you that their whole strategy is to eke out this Electoral College win and have this a real possibility that someone is going to be possibly a president for a second term down 5, 6, 7 million popular votes. And that's why we need to move towards a compact. I think the voluntary compact of states saying that they will pledge their electoral delegates to people, to the popular vote winner, I think that's the best shot we have of change in this country.
Yeah, and that's over at nationalpopularvote.com is the website for that. David in Columbus, Ohio, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman. I kind of want to echo what Tom was talking about earlier, but I think the subsidies are not negotiated harder. I think the Democrats have a chance to really play hardball with the Republicans on this, and voters will understand. Voters want something. Voters want to protect the post office. Voters want farm workers protected. Voters want rural hospitals protected. Voters want minimum wage higher. Voters want a Green New Deal. All these things could be negotiated. I think these are the things that should be coming up constantly in these subsidies.
David, I agree with you. Other countries, Canada and Britain, for far less cost, managed to have a simple thing of just saying, okay, we're going to pay workers to stay employed at 80% or 75%. Even that, in my view, would have been better than the unrestricted loans that we've been giving. And by the way, it wasn't just the $500 billion to Mnuchin or the Fed providing liquidity for the banks. It was also the small business loans. I mean, in my district, you've seen that the vast majority of those loans have gone to people who were connected to the banks. They've gone to people with 200, 300 size businesses, employees of 200 or 300, even though most of the jobs are created by businesses that are less than 20. And so I think it's a fair criticism of Congress, in which I serve. I can just say the progressives have been pushing for a different approach, and we're going to continue to push for a different approach in this next stimulus.
Good luck. I really hope that happens. I really do. And this could be, I think this could be political dynamite. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us. He's taking your calls for the hour. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 17th District of California, Silicon Valley area, and in the U.S. House of Representatives. His website, Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's our national town hall meeting here in second hour Monday with Congressman Ro Khanna. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Robin in Los Angeles. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay, I have a question that seems to be ignored and I don't hear much about. What are we are talking a lot about the corruption of the executive branch and aid going to friends of Trump. And I'm going, what? Did the framers of the Constitution not foresee a reckless and corrupt executive branch? Where are the real-time checks and balances on the executive branch power? The 25th Amendment doesn't work because it's controlled by the vice president of the executive branch. Impeachment and voting are after-the-fact solutions. So how is this president making so many reckless, real-time, unilateral decisions like a king that are being carried out? I'm so confused about this. And going back to the bipartisan condemned withdrawal of the troops in Syrian border, nobody wanted that, but he was just able to do it. To the delayed action about regarding the pandemic warnings, which Congress was also aware of. So why is everybody sitting there letting one man rule our country in a way that I do not believe our country is supposed to work? So that's my question. I did ask my representative Schiff at another town hall, and he said that the Congress has the power of the purse, but that clearly isn't enough to stop this real-time disaster, and blood is on everyone's hands for not doing anything in real time. So that's my question. What can you do real time to curtail these dangerous decisions from being enacted or ignored, like the ignoring of the pandemic warnings? It's not just one man's.
We got it, Robin. Let's let Congressman Khanna respond.
Robin, I share your frustration. I mean, first, let's say that our founders did anticipate this situation. I mean, they were widely read at Plato's Republic of the disintegration of democracy, and actually Madison has a paragraph in one of the Federalist Papers talking about the fact that they have to design a system knowing that enlightened statesmen will not always be at the helm. I think there are two things that they probably did not calculate. One is their assumption was that people's ambition in Congress and the institution in which they serve would make sure that they were keeping a check on the executive branch. They didn't anticipate the rise of party loyalty, and that people's ambition to their party would actually trump their ambition of their loyalty to their own institutions. And so one of the problems here is that you literally have Mitch McConnell and Republicans having little interest in standing up for the institution of the Senate or Congress and having totally abdicated responsibility. The second thing is, which Lincoln is so thoughtful on, and he says that, look, yeah, laws matter, but ultimately you need a political culture, and so much of our democracy is dependent on norms and cultural standards, and it's not just about legal standards. And I think that's what Trump has shown us, that no matter how much oversight you have, we had in the past presidents who were shaped by basic norms, that you listen to experts, that you listen to science, and this president has been totally oblivious to all of that. This is not to duck your point. We're doing everything we can, but it's highlighting problems in our democracy.
Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour, our national town hall meeting here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls for him in just a moment. You can find his website at Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep Ro Khanna, R-O Khanna, and we'll be right back. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour, our national town hall meeting. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Kim in Polson, Montana, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Well, hello there. It's an honor to speak to you, Tom. You're like the only face I have out there, along with Randy Rhodes and a few other good people that are out there telling the truth.
Thank you.
I live in a very conservative and beautiful community, and we're trying to work with the people here locally. We find that the change has to come from us. We cannot wait for the federal government to do anything for us. I originally immigrated from Germany, from a social democracy that worked very well. Thank you very much. And people here do not understand what a social democracy is because of how they're being taught about it in school. So my question is this. We have a corrupt government, period. There are some good people in there, like Congressman or Representative Ro Khanna, but what do we do to completely start over? This system is broke, and it's insane to continue to try to fix it. It's not working.
Kim, I share your frustration. Let me suggest a few concrete reforms. One is I think we need to have democracy dollars, meaning every voter becomes a donor so that everyone can run a campaign like Bernie Sanders, where you're being fueled by citizen contributions. If you give everyone $100, that frankly would be constitutional even under this court, because this court says that you can't restrict private spending, but you can dwarf private spending by making every voter a donor. And Russ Feingold and I and Bruce Ackerman have put forward a proposal. Second, we need to do far more in standing up for the right to vote. I mean, the disenfranchisement has been extraordinarily and one of the biggest challenges of our time. It's how people are retaining power and suppressing the popular will. We saw this blatant example of it in Wisconsin. And the final thing I would say is that we need to understand the importance of building movements. That's the only thing that really changes politics, and we got to continue to support movements being built on various issues.
Steve in St. Genevieve, Missouri, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, Tom. Hello, Congressman. I just heard this morning on the news that we're in a double dip depression now. So I was looking up, the last major depression. That was also classified as a double dip depression. The New Deal didn't actually get us out of the depression. It was actually a world war. Now, if the Green New Deal steps in, is that going to really get us out of this double dip depression only, or are we going to have to do something even greater in order to get us up out of this hole? Thank you.
Well, it's a great point. The center of the Congressional Budget Office came up with projections, and I don't know how valid they are, but they said, look, we're going to have massive economic drop in Q2, and by Q4, you're going to start to see economic growth and maybe the stock market stabilizing. But here was the key finding. They said unemployment, even for all of next year, was still going to be higher than double digits. And the challenge for us is what are we doing, as Tom pointed out, for ordinary people? How are we going to get people jobs? How are we going to make sure that they have the money they need for their necessities? I am less concerned with the economy picking up again for
those who are well off. What I'm more concerned about is the impact this is going to have on the 50% of the country that was living paycheck to paycheck, and on people getting back to work. And unless we change our priorities of federal spending, we're going to have that kind of depression or severe recession for that population for a long time.
Julie in Pattonsburg, Missouri. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thank you very much. I've been trying to get a hold of Tom for a couple of weeks, and I've always had poor timing. First of all, I'd like to make a couple of little quick statements to you. I'm not
Julie, we just have a minute and a half to the break. Can you please ask Congressman Khanna a question?
All right, well, let me throw this in here. Smithfield Farms backing is owned by the Chinese. Right. All right, my question is, we're not hearing any follow-up about the children that have been incarcerated down along the border. Do we have any concrete information on how they're surviving this epidemic of viral infections? How many more are there or less are there? Have any of them found their way to the parents?
So it's a very thoughtful question. With the oversight committee, we have asked time and again. They say that they've all been reunited. I don't believe that, and we're continuing to push the administration at every step. But I do think we should make an inquiry about the conditions, not just of the children, but the migrant workers at the border right now, and what we're doing on the making sure that they're not being susceptible to the pandemic. The Progressive Caucus has been writing letters, but we need to make it part of our next stimulus to require basic sanitation and basic medical care for people who are down there.
So the administration, let me get this straight, the administration is saying that there are no more children in cages?
That's what they say. They say that they're.
What about the thousands of kids they lost track of?
Well, they claim. I mean, I don't buy it. They claim that they've all been reunited to the extent that they've been able to keep track. But I've said to people, we track Amazon packages better in this country than they track those kids. And I think there are a lot of them who just got lost and who they don't have an ability to track, and they don't have the interest in tracking, and so they're coming back and saying they've done what they can, and they've reunited the people they can. But I think thousands of people fell through the cracks.
Yeah, what a mess. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us, taking your calls for the hour, our national town hall meeting here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Congressman Khanna's website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. He's the the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's a national town hall meeting with Congressman Ro Khanna right after this.
Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for white Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this local direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980, because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum No. 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so the South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire.
Coming up on the Science Revolution, as the Georgia governor rolled out a new death panel coronavirus plan, Dr. Andrew Glickson is here on the coronavirus versus climate extinction. While we're dealing with COVID-19, we're also hurtling toward extinction. Dr. Justin Frank drops by saying Trump could see dead bodies from coronavirus and just step over them. What? Also, Greg Palast explains the secret history of the Deepwater Horizon, BP's second blowout. It's the 10-year anniversary for Deepwater Horizon's debacle. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. We're doing a national town hall meeting here with Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents Silicon Valley in the U.S. House of Representatives from California. And Barbara in Fayetteville, Arkansas, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
First of all, thank you both for your voices and your educational expression. I'm going to try to summarize this. So, my entire life, I'm a Southerner, and I worked really hard to keep myself out of debt, but obviously debt doesn't matter to the government, but personally, yes. So my question to you is, I love the idea of the $2,000 for each person because that money will turn around and go right back in to the economy. However, the stock people and people still believing the stock market represents us. They're buying stock buyouts and doing whatever else. Now, the thing that's happened this week, the Federal Reserve, who keeps just printing, and evidently they're lending to 13 of the other central banks throughout the world. So I just don't understand why, as a country, we can't take care of the people that need the money the most, which are the citizens, and not the oligarchs, billionaires.
Well, I completely agree with you, and I think you're right to point out that the $2,000 a month is not just going to help ordinary people, but that money is going to be spent on groceries, on rent, on essential supplies. It's going to go right back into the economy, and it's going to actually create jobs. Whereas the money that's in the investor class, I mean, that could be sitting anywhere in the world, and it isn't being spent. And that's why it's been the basic principle of economics that you want to get the money out to people who are going to spend it. We have a consumer spending issue post-COVID. And so Tim Ryan and I, even the New Democrats, were all pushing that the monthly checks need to be part of this next stimulus.
Tim in Asheboro, North Carolina. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
All right. Thank you, Tom. And Congressman Khanna, it's an honor to be able to speak to you today. And I want to say something real quickly correct. The post office is mandated to pay $5.5 billion a year. $5.5 billion, and it's still in place. It's a law. The other thing is, Congressman from Pennsylvania wrote a letter to Mnuchin, to McConnell, and McCarthy to support the post office in this next stimulus. And my question to you is, sir, two, do you know about the letter? And two, would you be in support of a public postal service? Because I worked there for 40 years, and it's in danger of closing down.
Well, sir, thank you, first of all, for your work. I am in favor of a public postal service for the simple reason that no one has shown me how you could send a letter across the country and do it for 50 cents. I mean, FedEx can't do that. UPS can't do that. And even Trump, when you listen to him, says, well, I want the Postal Service to be charging higher rates. Well, the whole idea of the Postal Service is that anyone should be able to mail things. And letter carriers are the glue in communities. They are more than actually just delivering the mail. They're often counselors. They know what the people's problems are in a society. We need that kind of social support at a time where life is more atomized. So this is not a money issue. It would cost $10 billion. As you've seen, we've given out trillions. This is a values issue, and Democrats need to stand up for the Postal Service like we do for public education.
Javon in Los Angeles. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Professor, good morning, and Congressman, it's good to be on the phone with you guys. I'm going to try to make this quick. So originally, Thom Hartmann, what you don't know about me is that I'm one of the campaign managers for Barack Obama in Virginia Beach area. So, Congressman, what are we? Yes, exactly. What are we doing? What are we doing to energize our base? Because I hope you know, Congressman, that the most progressive candidate in the race is President Donald Trump. So I don't see anybody energized right now. I see that the senator Bernie Sanders has dropped out, what also leads us to drop out as well. So as a former manager for Barack Obama, what are we doing, Congressman, to energize his base? Because I don't see anything happening besides conceding to the progressive nature of Donald Trump.
Well, Javon, I appreciate you raising this. As you know, I was the co-chair for Bernie Sanders' campaign. Let me say what will not energize his base. The efforts right now in New York with Andrew Cuomo trying to cancel the presidential election, and Bernie Sanders just today has been in court trying to make sure that the election goes forward so that they don't strip him of his delegates. If he doesn't get 25% of delegates, we won't be able to be represented on those committee platforms. And then in California, even though he won that state, they have not made a commitment, the governor or party chair, that he would get to keep his delegates. I think that would be really hurtful to our ability to mobilize the base if Bernie Sanders isn't allowed to keep the delegates that he's earned, and if he isn't allowed to stay on the ballot in these other states. What we do need to do better in energizing young people, I agree with you that it's going to be necessary and a challenge, and we need to be speaking to their real needs, ending student loan debt, making sure that they have basic health care without going bankrupt, making sure that we're trying to get a Green New Deal. Young people are going to be inspired not by personality but by policy, and that is what some of us will continue to push for the Democratic Party.
Jack in Cortez, Colorado. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, I've got a couple questions. One is, it seems like, well, I'm 69 years old and a veteran, and it seems like the $1,200 stimulus check for senior citizens, I'm on just Social Security, has just been kind of just postponed and postponed again. Are we going to see another stimulus package that's going to include people that are retired like me, living on a very low income? And I'll take my answer off the air.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your service to our country. I agree with you. I mean, one $1,200 check is not enough, and some people still haven't gotten it. We need to have monthly checks while this crisis is going on. It's amazing to me how obvious that is. We've seen just on this show so many calls are saying, let's get a monthly check. The polls overwhelmingly show that people want that. Republicans, Democrats, Independents. This crisis was not caused by any person in this country, with the exception of mismanagement by some of the government. And so people should not have to suffer for it. And I am doing everything in my power to push for getting monthly checks out while this crisis is going. Tim Ryan and I have a proposal of $2,000 a month.
Philip in Island Pond, Vermont. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear all the good things, but my concern is this, and I haven't heard this question asked at all by anyone out there, of any of the Republicans or the Democrats. Why is this president so powerful, and why is he feared by both the Democrats and Republicans? This man does all these wrongful things, yet no one takes him on for this or challenges him on us. You know, talk is cheap, but money buys the whiskey. I don't understand, if he's done these things and they're not legal, how do they keep going on? I mean, the guy hasn't even released his tax returns, and that's historic in itself. Why is this president so feared? Everybody talks around the president, just they're afraid that he's going to do something to them. I haven't heard, the Progressive Network's great. I love free speech TV, but my concern is no one on either party has really taken this man on. That's it. What's going on? Why are we...
Got it. Sorry.
Philip,
I thought he was done.
I appreciate and understand your frustration. I'll say that, you know, the Democrats, we did impeach him and we tried to remove him from office. It's about the highest thing you can do. The fear is among Republicans, and that's because he's polling at 90-some% approval with Republican voters, and he's more popular with the Republican base than most of the Congress people and senators. And so they fear that one tweet from him will destroy their careers, will cost them their seats. I don't think Democrats fear him. I certainly don't think Nancy Pelosi or Adam Schiff or others fear him. They have been willing to stand up to him very clearly. But ultimately, in a democracy,
given that we only control one branch of government, the House of Representatives, there's only so much you can do when an entire party, the Republican Party, controls the Senate and has turned a blind eye to what Trump has been doing.
Congressman, we just have 45 seconds to the break. Is it your sense, based on what you're hearing from your colleagues, that Trump is slipping, that the Republicans are slipping as badly as it looks like they are?
I have heard greater concerns that about his reelection. His numbers have been poor in some of the battleground states. I think people were horrified by his comments about injecting Lysol, and you saw that he's discontinued his press conferences, at least for the time. I have seen more Republicans behind the scenes. Are they back on? I mean, I guess you can't keep up with him, but I think he's going to be more restrained in what he says. At least that's what the people have been saying, and people in battleground seats think that he's been doing them more harm than good.
Yeah, there you go. Actually, I'm not sure if he's going to be part of it. They announced yesterday they had canceled today's meeting, and then about 30 minutes ago they announced that it'll be back on at 5 o'clock Eastern time this afternoon. But they didn't say whether he'd be part of it or not. So anyway, Congressman Ro Khanna, National Town Hall meeting here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Back with your calls in just a moment.
Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You can find Congressman Khanna's website at Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep.Ro, R.O. Khanna. And welcome back. Susan in North Hollywood, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, thank you, and utmost respect and appreciation to both of you. Congressman, why can't California have its own bank like North Dakota, and we can have all that capital for our state and take power away from some of those big banks?
Susan, I'm for states setting up banks to invest in common projects. Of course, it's much harder to do as a state where you have to balance a budget and you can't have deficit spending. And so I think that we really need the federal government to do big projects on things like the Green New Deal or Medicare for All. But I'm supportive of states doing what they can within their budgets for banks.
Alice in Los Angeles, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning, gentlemen. The big topic of conversation around me is amongst the parents and children aged 17 through 23. And we all want to know why none of those kids, students or otherwise, have received either the $1,200 or the $500 deductible under their parents, and what is giving with this CARE proposal that's coming out of colleges.
Alice, I share your concerns. I mean, kids have not been adequately covered. They didn't get the stimulus check. Tim Ryan and I have been pushing again that they should be getting the stimulus check. Many of them have student loans. Elizabeth Warren and I, many progressives push that their student loans should be forgiven. That hasn't happened. Many have rents coming up, and we've been pushing for rental assistance. So I share your concern that they're some of the most economically vulnerable, and that we haven't done enough, and I can assure you it's a priority for progressives in the next stimulus.
Terry in Eugene, Oregon, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thank you so much for taking my phone call. I just have a couple really quick questions. It seems to me the Electoral College is the problem, and I'm curious, is there any legislation coming through or been proposed to get rid of it? My second question, why were his kids allowed to work in the White House? Who was in charge of maybe getting rid of them out of the White House, or why were they even let in there to do that? How did he get away with that? Those are my questions. Thank you.
Terry, I appreciate both questions. I would say on the Electoral College, as I said earlier, the best chance of getting that through is the National Popular Vote Initiative. You should go to that website. It allows states voluntarily to say, whoever wins the popular vote, we're going to pledge our electoral votes to them, and then we can get to 270. And if states do that, enough states that get to 270, you will change the system without needing a constitutional amendment, which is going to be very, very tough given the political climate. The second thing I'd say is, we had the Bobby Kennedy law, basically, which said a president couldn't appoint his own relative or her own relative to the cabinet, but that never covered White House advisors. And, presidents, the thinking was that presidents are going to rely on some advice, better to have them in the system. My concern is the lack of transparency and the lack of disclosures. I don't have a problem with him relying on family for advice, but the way they've done it and the extent of their portfolio is what concerns me.
We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna in just a moment. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. Did you know that Ronald Reagan committed treason to become president in 1980 and George Herbert Walker Bush was in on it and he avoided being prosecuted for this in 1992 with a little help from Bill Barr? It's on page 116 of my book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. We have a special video up over at ThomHartmann.com for supporters of our program, and it's about how a letter that the IRS sent out to 3.9 million Americans saved 700 lives. And you're like, wait a minute, the IRS saved 700 lives? How did that happen? Well, it had to do with Obamacare, and it's a fascinating story. And it turns out that this analysis of this IRS mailing was actually the first time that the federal government has done a study that actually proved that people having access to health care produces fewer deaths. For every 1,648 people who got the letter, there was one fewer premature death. I'll explain the whole thing in the video. It's as I said, it's available over at ThomHartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and it is really worth checking out. And it's a great ad, essentially, for a national health care system. Welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. And Derek in New Orleans, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah. Good afternoon. How you doing, Mr. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm saying I wonder what they're going to do about people on disability.
With disability, Derek?
Yes.
I mean, I think that's a very important point. More broadly, I have pushed that we need to reform SSDI and SSI. As you know, the income for that is not sufficient. We put too many restrictions on the amount people can save, and we need to increase that. But certainly at a time of COVID, where those who are disabled are often the most vulnerable, we need to make sure that they're getting the aid. And I think this is where a $2,000 check a month, which is universal, would work and help those with disabilities as well.
Charles in St. Peters, Missouri. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
How you doing, Congressman? Long-time listener, first-time caller. I had a question for you about child support and the stimulus package. Why is it that if you owe arrears, that they take all of the money from you? Myself, I owe a current child support and arrears, and I'm current on both of them for the last 10 years. Now, again, there's another stimulus package that's come out, but there's no relief for us. We're out of work. We can't pay our child support. So not only are we getting hit by that, they're taking all of the stimulus money from us. We're used to not getting income taxes, but we don't get any relief from the stimulus package at all. And the little funds that they're releasing, the $1,200 to $2,000 to $500 child credit, we don't get any part of that either. So what do we do?
Charles, I hear you. I mean, I obviously support the idea of money going for child support, and I think that that's absolutely critical. But I think what this suggests is that we need more stimulus, and it should be more regular, and that would make sure that you had some money and not all of it was going to child support. When you just get one $1,200 check, my guess is a lot of it goes to child support. But that's why we need a more generous stimulus package.
Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Bill, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, hi, Congressman. I understand that you represent Silicon Valley, and one of the best kept secrets I know you've been talking about is AI and quantum computing. And there's all these companies now that are offering free cloud work for the coronavirus. It's known that Google claimed quantum computing supremacy in November. I believe they did a problem in 10 minutes that would take the fastest supercomputer 10,000 years to do. So solving the coronavirus, which is nothing more than modeling and figuring in numbers, should be an easy one, and there should be some coordination between all the research facilities to work just on the coronavirus, I believe. There's still a big race, and it's a big security issue, as you know. I was wondering what you thought about that.
Well, Bill, I definitely think AI, which is capable of detecting patterns, and quantum computing, which is able to solve large problems quickly with computational ability, can help us solve these issues. But one of the things is that it can't just be all in the private sector. I mean, we needed to have much more public investment in public health and science. I mean, there were vaccines that were being developed in 2016 for the coronavirus, not for COVID-19 specifically, but the coronavirus, and they didn't go forward because there wasn't a market for it. And I think the lesson here is that, yes, we need private investment, but we also need public investment for the types of public health issues that the country is going to face, and that's where we've really not done enough as a nation.
Charles in Vancouver, Washington. Charles, we have less than a minute to the break. A real quick question, please.
Yeah, Tom. Great, Congressman. Great to talk to you for a moment. We need mail-in balloting this fall. I want to know, is it within Congress' purview to direct the states to mandate states conduct balloting by mail this fall?
Yes, Charles, I think it is. I mean, I think it's in our purview to ensure that the right to vote under the 15th Amendment means something, and under the 14th Amendment means something of the quality of the right to vote. We need to insist on that. We need to fund it. We need to fund states to do it. I'm very concerned that what the Republicans tried to do in Wisconsin, it didn't work there, but what they tried to do in disenfranchising people, that is the strategy for November. I mean, let's be very clear. If everyone in this country were to vote, we would win, and they understand that.
Absolutely, they do. I'll forward to you the email I got from FreedomWorks this morning about this. They are really cranking stuff up. Congressman Khanna, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Tom. Always enjoyed it.
Yeah, great talking with you. I'm always very pleased to have you on here. We'll be back. We're going to talk about vote by mail, in fact, with the Jefferson Smith.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Unfortunately, an exotic flu epidemic has broken out in Washington.
book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Animal Kind, Remarkable Discoveries About Animals and Revolutionary Ways to Show Them Compassion by Ingrid Newkirk and Jean Stone. This is from the very first chapter. Researchers at Germany's Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology were dumbfounded. The excitement wasn't over a new fossil or the discovery of a previously unknown human ancestor. It was over Rico, a border collie. In experiments conducted in 2004, the very normal seeming 10-year-old canine had learned to fetch more than 200 objects on command, and moreover, remembered them all a month later. Determined to discover the limits of Rico's abilities, the research team subjected him to a battery of cognitive tests that revealed astounding problem-solving abilities. Rico could easily retrieve from another room items he was familiar with, but when told to retrieve a new item, one he had never heard before, Rico correctly deduced that the unknown name must correspond with an unknown object and correctly retrieved it. The Border Collie's cognitive abilities were subsequently compared to that of apes, dolphins, parrots, and eventually human children. Researchers often end up comparing their animal subjects' intelligence to humans, but is intelligence truly easy to compare, animal to human, or even animal to animal? If Rico could use the process of elimination to correctly fetch a tennis ball, does that make him smarter than an Arctic tern who journeys 44,000 miles each year between the North and South Poles? Is a piano-playing cat more intelligent than a chimpanzee who shares 99% of her DNA with humans and can learn sign language? Comparing the intelligence of animals is, in fact, no easier than comparing the intelligence of humans. Who's smarter, Aristotle or Plato, Newton or Einstein, Monet or Manet, the red-lipped batfish or Chinese giant salamanders, the Indian elephant or the African elephant? In the end, ranking the relative intelligence of animals is a futile exercise. What's more, a recent study found that less than 15% of the estimated 9 million species on Earth have been discovered. Who knows what fantastical creatures reside at our ocean's crushing depths, soar high in the stratosphere, or creep deep in the densest jungles? What fantastic intelligence do they display? Or, more so, what fantastic intelligence we can't even comprehend? We often consider intelligence as the only factor in determining which animals deserve compassion and which don't. Yet we're still so limited in our understanding of human intelligence that it makes little sense to calibrate our animal brethren based on how similar their brains are to ours. Or perhaps you could say it's simply not an intelligent way to determine importance. The goal of this book is not to merely question that superiority or to show that animals think and act like us. It's to show how they do not and to honor those differences. How can anyone compare the mental faculties of a gibbon vaulting through the forest with a giant blue whale singing through the deepest oceans? Different animals excel at different actions. As we'll see in this book, animals think, navigate, communicate, love, and play in extraordinarily unique ways. However, for many years, scientists believed that intelligence was indeed all that mattered when it came to animals, and that intelligence consisted of a continuum with humans at the most developed end. Every other species could fit neatly into that spectrum, a concept heralded by the great naturalist Charles Darwin, who wrote in his 1871 book, The Descent of Man, that, quote, "The difference in mind between man and the higher animals, great as it is, certainly is one of degree and not of kind," end quote. In essence, Darwin meant that because all animals share a common ancestor, they also share the same toolkit of mental abilities, but at different levels. Not a new idea. 2,400 years ago, Aristotle presented his idea of natural ladder, or scala natura. Like Darwin, Aristotle advanced that all life could be conveniently ranked with lesser animals like worms on one end, intermediate animals like dogs and cats in the middle, and higher animals such as monkeys and humans at the far end. During the Middle Ages, Christian theologians expanded on Aristotle's teachings with the great chain of being, a hierarchical scale that began with God at the very top, followed by angels, humans, other animals, plants, and then minerals. Each layer of the chain also had its own hierarchy. Among humans, for instance, kings, aristocrats, and other noblemen were at the top, while peasants were relegated to the bottom. The highest-ranking animals were large carnivores like lions and tigers, who were untrainable and therefore seen as superior to docile animals like dogs and horses. Even insects were subdivided, with honey-producing bees ranked higher than mosquitoes and plant-eating beetles. Finally, at the very bottom sat snakes, their lowly station a result of the serpent's deception in the Garden of Eden. Even throughout the 20th century, scientists clung to the notion that animals can be neatly ranked by their human intelligence. Scientists devised increasingly cruel experiments that could serve as universal tests for animal cognition, many of them led by University of Wisconsin-Madison psychologist Harry Harlow. Previously, Harlow was best known for a series of experiments from the 1950s, in which he removed infant rhesus monkeys from their mothers and provided them surrogate mothers made from wire. The traumatized monkeys' desperate attempts to be caressed by their inanimate mothers during times of stress became the basis for research into maternal separation, dependency needs, and social isolations. Many historians cite Harlow as a factor in the rise of subsequent animal liberation movements. Later, Harlow developed experiments called learning sets, which effectively tested how well a subject could learn. For instance, an animal would be presented with two doors, one containing food. The test would be repeated until the animal learned the correct door. Much like Aristotle's Scala Naturae, it continues. Animal Kind is the book by Newkirk and Stone. We have a new video over at thomhartmann.com for the people who support our program, and it's an interesting one. The phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, has a really interesting history, and the exploitation of that phrase and that history by right-wingers in 20th century America, or late 20th century America, now 21st century America, also has a fascinating and rather grim history. Just the general absurdity of the idea that somebody can lift themselves off the ground by reaching down and pulling on a strap on their boots. I mean, just think about it for a second. But it's used, this is used as justification by right-wingers, particularly over the last 40 years since the Reagan Revolution, to say, oh, poor people, their poverty is their own fault. Check it out. It's over at thomhartmann.com.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And in about 10 minutes, 15 minutes or so, Jefferson Smith is going to drop by. He, in addition to filling in for me from time to time here on this program, he is a former member of the legislature of the state of Oregon. And so I wanted to just check in with him and see how, number one, how Oregon got vote by mail. I mean, I played the whole Freedom Works thing at the beginning of the hour about how, vote by mail is the new plan by Nancy Pelosi and the liberal Democrats like Tom Hanks to steal the elections in the fall. And in fact, there are 5 states where it's the only way you can vote. And I believe the only way. It certainly is the only way you can vote here in Oregon, and it is in Washington State. I know that for sure. And so, how did that work out? How did we get that and all that sort of stuff? And kind of pushing back on some of the misinformation that's out there that, vote by mail is a terrible thing. And, et cetera. I'm hearing this from the left as well as the right. So, we will talk about that. And also how Oregon is dealing with COVID. There's also, I want to get into or ask your thoughts on the Supreme Court. Is it time to expand the Supreme Court? Obviously not now, but after the election, if we get a Democratic Senate and if we get a Democrat in the House or in the U.S. In the White House and in the U.S. House of Representatives, obviously, do we expand the Supreme Court? I think so. And Elizabeth Warren has endorsed this, as have others. I think that that's a big deal. Speaking of the news of the day and just and the coronavirus. The United States, in fact, let me check the latest numbers here and just, share those with you. Right now, the United States has 50, we just kicked up, this is from Johns Hopkins, 55,118 people, Americans, dead. And by the way, that doesn't include a lot of people who died from coronavirus. It doesn't include a lot of the nursing home deaths. It doesn't include a lot of people who died at home. And now this new report out that's rather startling, suggesting that people in their 30s and 40s are not getting the coronavirus in their lungs,
Instead, it appears that one of the major parts of the body that this virus is attacking is called the endothelium. It's kind of like a saran wrap like internal lining. The inside the blood vessels, inside the arteries and veins, and the endothelium appears to be getting inflamed, and that inflammation is causing dysregulation of blood clotting and fibrin formation. And so as a consequence, people are getting blood clots. In fact, it's so bad, when they try to draw blood from COVID-19 patients, it clots in the tube, it clots in the hoses. When they try to run them on kidney dialysis machines, it clots everything up. This is something that we're just becoming familiar with now. But the bottom line is that, we officially have 55,118 deaths, but there's probably thousands and perhaps as many as 10,000 if you look at the number of deaths in the United States that are above the normal seasonal average. At least an additional 10,000 deaths of people who died of heart attacks or strokes that were never attributed to COVID-19, which means that the 58,220 people who died during the 20 years, from 1955 to 1975 of the Vietnam War, have now been surpassed. Donald Trump has killed more Americans than did the entire Vietnam War and all the presidents associated with it. And I say that very intentionally. Donald Trump killed them because had Donald Trump responded to this when China first told us, which was in December of last year, when China told the world, or even a week later when the World Health Organization in China released the entire genome, or 2 weeks later when the World Health Organization said, here's a test, and you can buy these test kits out of this company in Germany, and the WHO started shipping them for free to 60 different countries. Had Trump responded at all back then, instead of just lying through his teeth about the press, the security briefings he'd been getting all the way back to November. In November, we were telling Israel, look out, this virus is coming. If it infects the Middle East widely, you're going to have a crisis. If Trump had just not lied to us about that stuff, many of these people would not be dead. We're 4.5% of the world's population. We have fully 1/4 of the world's deaths. And we've got, by tomorrow, we'll officially be above, maybe even by late this afternoon, we'll officially be above the Vietnam death numbers, and we'll officially be over 1 million cases in the United States. And we have crappy testing here. We've only administered 5 million tests in a country of 330 million people. And and on top of that, you got a lot of people like healthcare workers. 9,000 healthcare workers have gotten sick from this thing, and many of them, and some of them have died. And so I think it's fair to say that the blood of these people, the deaths of these people, are on Donald Trump's hands. And to emphasize that point, consider this. This is from the BBC this morning. The headline: coronavirus, quote, currently eliminated, end quote, in New Zealand. New Zealand's a country of 5 million people. Australia is a country of, I believe, 20 million, maybe 30 million. Australia is on path to do this. They recorded just 16 new cases, no deaths in Australia. That was yesterday on Sunday. But New Zealand, here it is. New Zealand says it has stopped community transmission of COVID-19, effectively eliminating the virus. With new cases in single figures for several days, they had 1 case on Sunday. New Zealand, 1 new case. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said the virus was, quote, currently eliminated. Now, they're still keeping the country relatively locked down. The entire country, for the entire period of time, and by the way, they're closer to Asia than we are, has reported fewer than 1,500 confirmed or probable cases and 19 deaths. Why? Because they immediately responded. They immediately put into place testing and contact tracing, and they locked down their economy. They are now starting to open their economy because, hey, nobody's got it here anymore. Very, very few people do, and so they're moving ahead. Meanwhile, we're learning this latest economic rescue package, the one that Republicans forced Democrats to go back to Congress last week for. And, in a couple of weeks, we're going to find out how many of those members of Congress are now sick with coronavirus as a consequence of these political games the Republicans are playing. But the headline over at the New York Times by Jesse Drucker, the tax break bonanza inside the economic package. The federal government, I'm just quoting from the New York Times, the federal government is giving away $174 billion in tax breaks, overwhelmingly to rich individuals and large companies. None specifically target businesses or individuals harmed by the coronavirus. Barely 2 years after congressional Republicans and President Trump lavished America's wealthiest families and countries with a series of lucrative tax cuts, those same beneficiaries are now receiving a second helping. You get this? And then, Donald Trump is reopening the country, right? Including, starting out at the very beginning, gyms. Well, this is a guy who doesn't care about physical fitness. Why gyms? Well, it turns out 2 owners of fitness chains were among the 16 executives on a coronavirus-related call with Trump the day before his reopening plans were announced. And working on the issues actively is Jim Worthington, a fitness center owner, board member of an industry trade group, and founder of the People for Trump PAC. And Rudy Giuliani's son, Andrew Giuliani, is working on behalf of gyms in the White House Office of Public Liaison. Isn't that sweet?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So now you too can go get sweaty and get coronavirus. Thank you, Donald. And welcome back. Whoops, let me get the right hybrid here. Robin in Kingston, Washington. Hey, Robin, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to confirm an observation that you made earlier today. And the reason I can confirm this is that I work the streets all the time, and I haven't stopped now because I do this alone. Last Wednesday, Thursday, Friday up in North Kitsap in Washington State here, the county, I ran 3 individual civil information events in support of Earth Day. And so clearly that brings out at busy intersections. And so people, the Trumpsters, drive by in their high-rise pickup trucks. And I will tell you, since I track this down a lot, that the numbers of Trumpsters are dwindling in comparison to, even when it was busy. In other words, I do the ratio, and so.
So, Robin, is this like you're standing on the street corner with a sign that or something like that? I'm talking about Earth Day, and people drive by and they either give you a thumbs up or give you the finger kind of thing? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, that's what it is. I have 2 large banners and 6 or 7 other stand-up signs that I get every vehicle going through the intersections and stuff like that. I do this weekly, all during the year, and I'm continually taking a response from that, and I still get very, very positive reactions overall, but I get the occasional reaction from the Trumpsters, and so I have a pretty good mathematical understanding. And you said this morning that you're seeing they're diminishing in numbers, and I'm confirming with you that indeed is the case. Now, I will say this in sort of a pejorative fashion. What I am seeing is that the average Trumpster who is still responding, it's making the IQ quotient of that group go down. In other words, I think there's some information that is slowly penetrating them, although I am a proponent of ignoring them all. It's just that facts of life are penetrating these people, and we should still.
So, what makes you think their IQ is going down? Are you seeing more Trumpsters giving you the finger who have like truck nuts and stuff like that, or I mean,
yeah, and the lower level, the older beat up junky cars, the white guys that have got, basically nothing to lose. I see a very clear diminishment of the average, what looks to me like the average person's position.
So
on
the middle class
educational...
Trumpsters are going away, and they're being replaced by economically distressed Trumpsters, shall we say?
The Trumpsters I'm talking about are the ones who are the ones that are going away, Tom, are the ones who have higher, I'm going to guess, intellectual and reading and thoughtful skills, okay? I'm going to say the mid-40s. They're all men. They're all white men, occasional white woman, okay? But in general, you can see that I'm seeing that the group is retracting into more like the white male supremacists.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Robin, thanks for that. It's great to have essentially a Gallup poll going on the streets of Washington State. That's spectacular. Robin, thanks so much for the call. Jefferson Smith is up next. Stick around. We'll be right back. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is our buddy Jefferson Smith. He is the host and a talk show host over on X-Ray FM here in Portland, the progressive radio station 91.1 FM in the city of Portland, and also the co-owner of the station. He helped start it. xray.fm is the website, and you can tweet him at Jefferson D. Smith. Jefferson, great to have you with us, and when you're not filling in for me, one of the things I mentioned in the setup, or in my tease that you were coming up, was that you were a member of the legislature of this state. You were a member of the House of Representatives in the state of Oregon for some time, and so you're in a position to really understand how vote by mail came about in Oregon, how well it's working, what the general sense is about it. Tell us about vote by mail in Oregon, particularly for people who may not be Oregon residents who are listening to. Sure. In the first hour, I shared this thing from FreedomWorks that I got that says, Nancy Pelosi and the radical left are hell-bent on stealing the 2020 election. This isn't just the Democrats. Liberal extremists like Michelle Obama, Rita Wilson, and Tom Hanks support this too. The entire DNC and establishment knows if they can get vote by mail passed, it'll lead to massive voter fraud and help them win in November. So what do you think?
Well, first of all, let me just say thank you for keeping doing your show every day, keeping some degree of pro-democracy rhythm in our lives. Just really appreciate it, Tom. It's great to hear your voice. And yeah, did serve in the legislature, and prior to that, maybe even more aptly, worked as a democracy activist, right? We built the bus project and works to engage young people in democracy, and vote by mail played a pretty big role. A little bit about the origin. Yeah, there are a lot of people, any success has 1,000 mothers. But this is something that started because one human being, who I can't remember if she was a postal worker, I think she worked actually in the clerk's office, the elections office. She said, you know what? We could save a bunch of money. We could save like $3 million if we instituted vote by mail. And, there's always budget problems in the state, so what if we did that? She pitched it to a legislator, and the legislator put it in. The Secretary of State at the time, Phil Keisling, likes the idea. Senator Mark Hatfield, Republican from Oregon, likes the idea. The League of Women Voters liked the idea. League of Conservation Voters liked the idea. A bunch of people piled on, and eventually, in phases, it happened. In fact, my first vote, the first vote I cast as a person, was the last election in Oregon that was at polling places, and just before we moved to all vote by mail. And this is something, and let me just take a crack at what you were saying. I was listening to the show at that point, and yet now only anti-democracy advocates would be against vote by mail. Now, vote by mail I don't think is enough. You also have voting centers. You also want to make sure you have automatic voter registration. Those are the things to do. But there has not been any data to demonstrate that vote by mail gains advantages, where I was looking for, one party over another. In fact, in Oregon, now district drawing, that matters a lot. You can do a lot of rigging of legislative districts by rigging legislative districts. But just by giving more people to vote, No, that has not been demonstrated to have a partisan advantage or disadvantage one way or another. In fact, right now, you got like 80+% supporting Oregon, including 76% of Republicans supporting vote by mail in Oregon. This is something that people like. When they do it, they like it. The elected officials, Republicans and Democrats, they also tend to like it. It is really only the anti-democracy activist who doesn't like it.
Right. Yeah. Well, Freedom Works, was originally funded by the Kochs, so, or at least a good chunk of it. So that shouldn't surprise us, I suppose.
No, and we saw it. And you've talked about Nancy McLean's book, Democracy in Chains, right? We know what's going on in the country. But what I want to do is give 3 ways, not because Oregon's so special, but because we've been lucky. 3 ways that I think that the country should learn from Oregon at this time in history. And we already did that first one. I really think this is the time for historic change on vote by mail. And I hope a lot of listeners are pushing their legislators and pushing their mayors and governors to institute something like it.
And they are?
I think there are more folks who are pushing around the country. But I wanted to give another fact. That other fact is something really interesting that Oregon gives a window to. And I don't say this just as a homer, because I think this is what would have happened had we had a legitimate federal government.
Jefferson, your voice just got really muffled. I don't know if you put your thumb over the microphone or what, but...
Testing, can you hear me?
There you go, yeah.
All right, sorry about that. Right now, you know that Oregon is 46th in the country cases of COVID-19 per 100,000 people, with Alaska, Hawaii, and Montana. Did you notice that?
Jefferson, your phone just croaked. It got weirder and weirder, and then it just croaked. You there?
I am here, but if you can't hear me, it doesn't help if I'm here.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, we have about a minute. So what's up?
All right. Well, I'll just say one little fact is Oregon right now is 46 in cases of COVID-19 per 100,000 people. We're not the most. We're down there with Alaska and Montana and Hawaii. And I think what you can look at is Oregon is what other states would be like, and we're shut down too. But what other states would be like if we had acted a little more like Australia, a little more like New Zealand, a little bit more like South Korea. We had the advantage of of California and Washington moving quickly. We learned from them, and right now we've only got like 50+ cases per 100,000, and it's another example of how I think we can learn from different states in this time. I wanted to give a plug. On Wednesday evening, you and I are going to do a digital phone call. Hopefully it'll work better than the technology of the phone I work tonight. And if anybody wants to email us at morning@xray.fm, we would love to have any Tom listener join in to our little digital meeting. But otherwise, I'll stop chewing up your airtime with a bad phone.
No, that's fine. Morning, MORNING at xray.fm.
Yes, sir.
That's the email address? Okay, great. And, Jefferson and I are going to be doing that. And X-Ray FM is one of the great resources here in this town for progressive programming and some great music programming as well. xray.fm is the website. Jefferson's Twitter handle is Jefferson D. Smith. Jefferson, thanks so much for dropping by.
Tom, thanks for having me. I'll have a better phone next time.
There you go. Okay, thank you. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Our selection today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is This Land, How Cowboys, Capitalism, and Corruption Are Ruining the American West by Christopher Ketchum. This is from Chapter 1. It's about halfway through the chapter. He's talking about Bernard DeVoto. DeVoto was the first major historian of the West who was also an environmentalist and an activist, the first chronicler of what Wallace Stenger called the West's curious desire to rape itself. DeVoto was a Westerner raised in Utah. He suffered in the provincialism and intolerance of Mormon country, went east to study, and then teach at Harvard, settled in Cambridge, but never forgot the beauty of his native ground. Loving the land and history, said a magazine profile, but loathing the society. His histories, novels, criticism, his essays in Harper's Magazine were for 20 years, where for 20 years he wrote the oldest column in American journalism, Easy Chair, pointed always west. His trilogy, published in the 1940s, The Year of Decision, Across the Wide Missouri, and The Course of Empire, garnered the Pulitzer, the Bancroft, and the National Book Award. Widely celebrated, DeVoto used his position to become his generation's most outspoken defender of the public lands. He called the West a plundered province, a resource colony for corporations and absentee landlords who practiced, quote, an economy of liquidation. He was broad in his assault on the liquidators. He went after the timbermen, the mining companies, the stockmen, the cattle barons, the oilmen and gasmen, the overgrazers, the deforesters, the denuders, the profiteers of gold rushes and grass rushes. He named the bankers and congressmen who abetted the plundering, the Western hogs, he called them. They've been busy for a century laying waste to the West. Long before the public domain was vested with any permanence legally in the hands of the American people, before there was a consideration of the land itself or any environmental ethic, the West had been torn up, beaten down, subjected to the greed and profligacy of the commodity users. Ironically, the users, in their race to liquidate, helped drive the creation of the public land system we know today, as they proved the need for federal stewardship to stop their abuses. Massive timber frauds in the 19th century, the largest land frauds seen in the West, led directly to the establishment of the Forest Service in the 20th century, its purpose to stop deforestation. Out-of-control cattle numbers in the steppe, overgrazing that turned the fragile soil to dust, led directly to the federal grazing regulatory system that eventually became the BLM. When in 1946 the commodity users conspired to destroy the public land system, the system in which DeVoto saw the only hope for Western conservation and preservation, he stood to oppose them. Quote, he was the first conservationist in nearly half a century, except for Franklin D. Roosevelt, to command a national audience, said Arthur Schlesinger Jr., a student of his at Harvard. No one did more in the post-war years to rouse public opinion against the spoilers than DeVoto. DeVoto and Schlesinger had seen firsthand what unregulated industry could wreak in the arid lands when they drove cross-country together in the spring of 1940 and entered western Kansas past the 100th meridian. These were the last years of the Dust Bowl before FDR's soil conservation programs and the return rains of the 40s could heal the land. Wrote DeVoto, a cemetery was 10 inches deep in sand. Half the headstones had toppled into it and been partly covered. Sagging shacks that had been farmhouses had their windows blown out, and dust was 4 or 6 feet deep against their western walls and a foot deep against the far wall. A repulsive dust as fine as sifted flour. Now, 6 years after that trip with Schlesinger, DeVoto was confronted with the West's cattle barons, the liquidators of the grass, who were hell-bent on reducing the region to the same mess of dust. In 1946, the Joint Committee on Public Lands of the American National Livestock Association met in Salt Lake City to discuss the goal of undermining what few regulations had been placed on livestock operators under the newly formed Bureau of Land Management. The stock growers' ambition went further than mere deregulation. They hatched a plan with the help of friends in Congress to begin moving all federal land, the BLM and Forest Service domain, as well as the national parks, into the control of the states. The plan evolved through 1946, 47, 48, with legislation making its way on Capitol Hill. DeVoto covered the story for Harper's. He cautioned that the stock growers were attempting, quote, one of the biggest land grabs in American history. The public lands are first to be transferred to the states on the wholly justified assumption that there should be a state government not wholly compliant to the desires of stock growers. It could be pressured into compliance, he wrote in Harper's. Nothing in history suggests the states are adequate to protect their own resources or even want to, or suggests that cattlemen and sheepmen are capable of regulating themselves even for their own benefit, still less the public's, end quote. The long-term plan, he said, was to get rid of the public lands altogether, to place the common possession of the American people into private hands. The livestock industry went on the attack, mounted a PR campaign to discredit DeVoto, and pressured Harper's to cease its support. Unmoved, the magazine continued for 3 years to publish his relentless exposés of the intrigues in the state houses and in the Western Caucasus. Devoto had convinced the editors, when no other publication that mattered in the East cared, that the threat of such land transfer was an existential one. This Land by Christopher.
Coming up on the Science Revolution, as the Georgia governor rolled out a new death panel coronavirus plan, Dr. Andrew Glickson is here on the coronavirus versus climate extinction. While we're dealing with COVID-19, we're also hurtling toward extinction. Dr. Justin Frank drops by saying Trump could see dead bodies from coronavirus and just step over them. What? Also, Greg Palast explains the secret history of the Deepwater Horizon, BP's second blowout. It's the 10-year anniversary for Deepwater Horizon's debacle. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Well, more symptoms of the massive, extraordinary, mind-boggling incompetence of the Trump administration. And I would say this isn't just incompetence, and it's not just malice. You know, they just like hurting the American people. It's ideological. These guys are following the Koch brothers, libertarian theory that the only thing that government is good for is running the army and the police. That's it. There shouldn't be public schools. There shouldn't be a post office. There shouldn't be unemployment insurance. There shouldn't be Social Security. There shouldn't be Medicare or Medicaid. None of those things. Even public roads should be toll roads that are owned by rich people. Nothing that the government does should be done by the government. Everything should be done by billionaires and big corporations that they own. Period. Full stop. And as a consequence of that, the government, this happens when Republicans staff the government, right? Ronald Reagan put Bill Bennett, the guy who said that there should be no Department of Education, in charge of the Department of Education. He put, James Watt, who said that it doesn't matter what you do to public lands out west. It absolutely doesn't matter, because Jesus is coming back, and when he does, he's going to make all things new. So James Watt was selling off public lands to oil companies and uranium mining companies and gold mining companies for pennies on the dollar. Forget about if they were, historic sites or national parks or Indian reservations or whatever it may be. James Watt was selling it. That was Reagan. Then George W. Bush comes along and says, government can't do anything right, so why even bother? Let's put a guy who is a judge for a horse race, not training. What do you call it? They have these contests. It's like the dog contests, right? Who's the dog? Who's the coolest dog? There's a word for it. But in any case, horse show. So he puts Brownie, Michael Brown, who was a judge for horse shows, in charge of FEMA. And of course, that led to the Katrina disaster, predictably. And so now we've got Donald Trump, and he's put the guy in charge of our coronavirus response, in addition to his son-in-law, who's, worthless, useless, does nothing more than go around and extort foreign governments to loan him money so to bail out his lousy purchases of things like 666 Fifth Avenue. The other guy that's in charge of this, in addition to his son-in-law, Jared, is a guy who is a Labradoodle breeder. Which is why, and then, Sonny Perdue, right, is in charge of the agriculture department. Right. Let's get people who really have an interest in these businesses, in these agencies to run them. Well, this from Politico.com by Scott Mahaski. Tens of millions of pounds of American-grown produce is rotting in fields as food banks across the country scramble to meet a massive surge in demand. The Agriculture Department took more than a month to make its first significant move to buy up surplus fruits and vegetables, despite repeated entreaties. Nikki Fried, Commissioner of Agriculture in Florida, probably a Republican, said, "It's frustrating." Fried Freed actually turns out is a Democrat. Sorry about that. Freed asked Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue nearly a month ago to get funding so that more Florida farmers could get plugged into federal food purchasing and distribution services so that they could basically take their surplus food that otherwise would be going to restaurants, because it's a separate supply chain for restaurants, because restaurants buy things in big boxes, in bulk, and whereas retail stores buy things in small packages that are, individually packaged. So, Purdue could have done this, but it has been 6 weeks since President Donald Trump and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention first urged Americans to avoid restaurants, a move that immediately severed demand for millions of pounds of food. Instead, now what we have is images of farmers destroying tomatoes, piling up squash, burying onions, dumping milk, at the same time that you have people literally lined up for miles to get food from food banks. Demand at food banks has increased an average of 70%, and 40% of the people showing up in food banks have never been to a food bank in their lives. This is nuts. This is just plain old nuts. But anyhow, back to your calls. Len in Woodmere, New York. Hey, Len, what's on your mind?
Hi, you were talking about the Supreme Court, and I think the perfect correction to the current mode would be to increase the number to 13, which in and of itself would do the most to depoliticize it, but also create a 26-year term limit, which if at the end of 26 years the current president wanted to renominate the person, then he could. But, the Supreme Court was created when life expectancy wasn't carrying out till 85, 90. And 26 years is pretty much what a lifetime of ideas is in anyone's prime. And
where'd you come up with that specific number? Why 26 instead of 20 or 23 or 18?
13 would, every 2 years, they would automatically expire every 2 years. There'd be a new expiration. So,
I see. If you have 13 members and you have 26, and you have people with 26-year terms, and you stagger them to start on a 2-year basis, then every 2 years you got a new. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, and past 11 into 13 would totally depoliticize it, because any one Supreme Court member just wouldn't have that much sway. And obviously, you still need an odd number, because there's got to be even in tennis, you got to win with an odd number.
There you go. Yes, fascinating, Len. Thank you. I agree with you. I think that's a great idea. Uli in Teaneck, New Jersey. Hey, Uli, what's up? Thanks for watching us on YouTube.
Yeah, hi, Tom. There's been talk about the changing the structure of the Supreme Court in the U.S., and I wanted to give you the basic structure of the German Supreme Court. So that's Bundesverfassungsgericht. It contains of 16 judges, have to be a minimum of 40 years old, elected for a 12-year term, and the retirement age is 68. They only can be elected once. The nomination process is also different. Half come from the lower house, or the Bundesrat, and half come from the upper house, the Bundestag.
So they're elected by whom? By their peers or by the people?
They have been nominated through the parties, and then they get elected to the lower and upper house. I don't know all the exact.
So your equivalent of the House and the Senate vote on which of their members move up into the Supreme Court, basically.
Right. And then the president, I think they alternate. I don't know.
The president of the court?
How many years? I'm not old. I don't know about all the details, but this is the basic structure of it.
Right. Now, I understand Germany also has a separate Supreme Court that just deals with constitutional issues, and the normal Supreme Court does not have the power of judicial review. Do I understand that correctly, Uli?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
I couldn't say.
All right. Okay. Well, that's fascinating. Did you want to add anything to that?
That's all. Just so Americans
Uli,
get an idea how it works somewhere else.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It's good and useful information, and I do appreciate it. Aaron in Minneapolis. Hey, Aaron, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, Tom. I'm a small business owner from Minneapolis, and I was just thinking, sort of out ahead, in case we don't have mail-in voting available like we would all like, that I am planning on giving my staff the day off on Election Day, and I thought it might be worth planting the seed now that for any small businesses out there, or any business owners of any size, that if we don't have the mail-in voting available, maybe we could start a campaign now to try and spread the word that let's plan on doing this so that we have as many people that are ready to go vote and prepare as much as we can with whatever masks and gloves and we could try and mobilize. And
Aaron, under normal circumstances, I would support what you're saying, but if you make it a holiday, you're increasing the probability of crowds. Why not instead say that early voting is now going to last for 30 days? And so you've got 30 days of voting. So, instead of having 100 people show up at the polls, you've got 5 or 10 people, per hour or something like that, so that you don't end up with large numbers of people.
That sounds awesome. I think I'm just worried about worst case. I guess my idea is a worst case scenario type situation. I would love.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Yeah, I'm with you on that. But I think that probably early voting, if a state is absolutely, if it's like in their constitution, and so it would take some sort of massive change to go to vote by mail, then at the very least, let's have early voting, which is probably not prohibited in their constitution, last at least 4 weeks. Aaron, thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Robbie in Portland. Hey, Robbie, you calling to rag on Joe Biden again?
Well, first of all, he has 8 allegations. You said he only has 1. But second of all, his campaign actually gave money to SDK, which formed the organization Time's Up, which is what Tara Reade went to. And he gave that money to SDK right after Tara Reade said she went to Time's Up. How is it that that you think that this isn't a big deal?
Well, let me ask you a question, Robbie. If you're given a choice between a guy who has over 20 women accusing him of rape and 1 woman accusing him of abuse, which candidate do you take?
Well, again, it's 8, but that's all we know about. And third of all, I'm not going to vote for either racist or a rapist on either side. I vote for what I believe in. And I think, honestly, you said I was the problem because I call into your show and complain. That's what your whole show does. And third of all, I don't know. I don't get why. I think the Democrats are taking advantage of the voter, and it's because of people like you who are going to vote Democrat no matter what. And they know that they can abuse us. They can do whatever they want. They'll gaslight us. They'll do the bait and switch as long as I said
last week when you called, Robbie, if I get your complaints about the Democratic Party, when you have taken some real steps to change the Democratic Party, call back and I'll listen to your complaints. Maverick in Edmonds, Washington. Hey, Maverick, what's on your mind?
Tom, I really appreciate the fact that you take people, put them on the air, and give them a voice, even though you disagree with them. I think that's fair, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
2 things are going to save us, Tom. It's science and conversation, not superstition or dogma. That's my little rant. But my question for you right now is, why is the stock market still so high when nobody's working, planes aren't flying, petroleum's not selling, et cetera, et cetera? What do you have to say about the stock market being so high under these?
There's 2 reasons. The first is the Fed. The Fed is buying one of the main reasons why people lose their confidence in a corporation during a recession or a depression is because they think the corporation might go out of business. And if the way that corporations borrow money is by issuing bonds, just like the federal government does. Well, if the corporation doesn't have any revenue and they can't pay for those bonds, they default on the bonds, and then the corporation, the next step is bankruptcy. And so that causes people to flee from the corporate stock, to start selling the stock, which crashes the price of the corporation's stock. So the Fed has stepped in and bought trillions, literally trillions with a T, trillions of dollars worth of corporate stocks, including junk-rated stocks. So what's happening is that these companies are not going to go out of business. They're going to be able to basically borrow endlessly at rates that are in the neighborhood of, less than 1%, less than 0.5%, very, very low interest rates. And now, in fact, the Fed is in some cases loaning money to these corporations in addition to buying their bonds. So you have companies like, for example, Microsoft. Nobody doubts that 5 years from now, when the coronavirus is in our rearview mirror, Microsoft is still going to be a very, very valuable company. So the value of their company has not decreased. The question is the viability over the short term. Will they be able to make it through this? And by the Fed stepping in, what they're saying is, yes, we're going to keep these companies viable no matter what. And so there's that. Number two is that the stock market is not an indicator of the economy as a whole. The stock market is an indicator of the health of corporate America and very, very rich people. So, that's why, Maverick. It's mostly the Fed. It really is. Maverick, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back. Did you know that Ronald Reagan committed treason to become president in 1980 and George Herbert Walker Bush was in on it and he avoided being prosecuted for this in 1992 with a little help from Bill Barr? It's on page 116 of my book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Alan in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Alan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good morning, Tom. I'm actually in Seattle, but that's close enough. Well, I'm going to take a little disagreement. The Fed is not buying stocks at the moment. They are buying corporate bonds, and I guess they're buying junk bonds to support the company. So I agree with you.
3 weeks ago, I read in the Financial Times that they had stated that they were going to begin buying not just bonds, but equities as well. What am I missing?
Well, I just did a search, and about 3 weeks ago, April 6th, they were certainly considering it. Now, if they had actually done it, I don't think the stock market would be where it is today. It would be back up at all-time highs. Simply because there is no end. It is at an all-time high compared to 2 years ago. That's only recouped 50% of what it lost from February 19th to March 23rd. So it's a nice Fibonacci number somewhere.
Yeah, the bottom line, I get that. Alan, the bottom line is neither of us actually knows whether they're buying stocks. We do know that they're buying bonds. But whether they're intervening in the stock market, we don't know for sure. We just know that they've authorized themselves to do so.
Got it. Yeah.
Which I think is a violation of the law. Say what?
Thank you, Tom.
Okay, so you're going to bail out. Okay, Alan, thank you. Scott in Miami. Hey, Scott, what's up?
Yes. Hello, Mr. Hartmann. I follow you religiously on your podcast. I enjoy your podcast immensely. Let me just say that this coronavirus has already created a second Great Depression. We're in a second Great Depression already. It's going to even get worse. I'd like to say, furthermore, that this coronavirus is a vast plot of the New World Order to deliberately destroy the U.S. economy. I blame Janet Yellen, Alan Greenspan, Ben Bernanke, Hank Paulson, Steve Mnuchin, George Soros, and other international Jewish bankers for America's second Great Depression.
Oh, sweet Jesus. Joyce, I just put Scott on hold so that you can flag his phone number. I do not want to take another call from an anti-Semite like that. He's on line 6. Brittany in Los Angeles. Hey, Brittany, what's up?
Hey, so my boyfriend had just showed me your podcast. I think it's awesome. We've been reading a book called The Economic Hitman by John Perkins, and it's disgusted me with how America has treated other countries and how the luxuries that we have on the backs of debt from other countries, and how there's migrants coming from Central America right now because of what we've been doing to their countries. So I've even thought, maybe I should move out of the country because the quality of life here isn't as high as what it shows on TV. But I think that would be kind of running away from the problem. And I was wondering.
Well, plus nobody is going to take us, Brittany. Canada is no longer basically taking American citizens.
I know. I'm like, well, maybe Portugal or Costa Rica or just somewhere that's,
Mexico just kicked a bunch of us out. I mean, it's like, the rest of the world is looking at us going, oh, man, no way. In fact, I think, you can kind of see the evolution of this. The rest of the world first respected us, then feared us. Now they feel sorry for us.
Yeah, it's disgusting. And the way that where our government is going right now with corporatocracy, with the Glass-Steagall Act from the 90s, with economic hitmen around the world, Amazon not paying taxes, like, what is it? The only reason why I would stay here is because I would want to take action that was meaningful. You can't just write to a congressman. I kind of feel like they're all a part of it. Like, they're all being lobbied. I'm wondering, just from your point of view, what is the best action that a citizen can take to change the tide? Because with so much money involved in politics, I feel very helpless,
Yeah, I get absolutely where you're coming from, Brittany, and I've spoken and written extensively about this. I think the two things we need to do, first of all, let's identify where this originated. In 1976, the U.S. Supreme Court, from the founding of the Republic until 1976, giving money to politicians in exchange for them doing things for you was considered bribery, and it was a crime. It was a felony. And in 76, the Supreme Court ruled in a decision called Buckley versus Vallejo that if a rich person owns a politician, or even dozens of politicians, and those politicians dance to that rich person's tune, that's no longer called bribery. That's called freedom of speech. Money is speech. So that's where that originated. And that brought us Reagan, and that brought us the Reagan Revolution. So we got to get money out of politics. There's only one party that has been working aggressively to get money out of politics, and that's been the Democratic Party. So, but that said, there are still a lot of Democratic politicians who are taking big money and who are relatively corrupt. So the two things that we need to do, Brittany, is number one, we need to get inside the Democratic Party. Volunteer with your local, in Los Angeles County, contact your county Democratic Party and say, how can I participate? How can I become a precinct committee person? How can I become an insider and help turn this party progressive and help fight money in politics, number one. And number two, look for progressive politicians who are not corporate funded. People like Congressman Mark Pocan or Ro Khanna, some of the people who have come on our program, Pramila Jayapal, the Bernie Sanderses of the world, but a lot of them are much more low profile. And do everything you can to help them. And in most cases, there's a lot you can do without spending a penny. You can phone bank for people. You can publicize what they're doing on social media. And because what we need is that political revolution. So those are the two big steps that I would say, Brittany, that we really need to be taking. Brittany, I got to run. It's the end of the show, but thanks so much for the call. It's great to hear from you, and I'm glad you found the program. Say hi to your boyfriend for me. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow as this week rolls on. And we'll see if Donald Trump shows up this afternoon at his, you'll see. I'm not going to be watching. I just can't stand it. I'll read about it in the papers tonight, right, or online, if Trump shows up. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Tag you're it. Share Progressive Media with your friends, by the way, please. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Unfortunately,